Well, good morning and almost good afternoon in some parts of Canada. We want to welcome you here today to the Respectful Terminology National Dialogue.
Oui, merci tout le monde d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui et bienvenue à notre atelier concernant la terminologie respectueuse.
This dialogue has been a long time in coming, and today we will learn about what is happening across the country by honoring the past and the present work that's going on now.
Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour honorer le passé et en discuter et partager nos expériences professionnelles et personnelles en ce qui concerne nos projets et nos initiatives ayant comme but d'améliorer la terminologie qu'on utilise quand on parle des peuples autochtones au Canada.
Then we will move into breakout rooms to have listening sessions where we can hear back from all of you about what is needed regarding respectful terminology.
Et donc, après, nous allons former des groupes de travail pour en discuter plus au sujet de la terminologie respectueuse.
And then move towards listening to a potential vision for the future.
Et pour créer une vision pour l'avenir.
But first and most importantly, we will start off with a traditional welcome, and the person who is going to be welcoming us first is Shirley Hardman, who is a senior advisor on Indigenous affairs at the University of Fraser Valley, guiding Indigenization and reconciliation work. She has brought to the University of Fraser Valley Hamelkamelum language credited classes and worked integrating Indigenous knowledge and Indigenization into the University of Fraser Valley. So it's my honor to ask her to welcome us here today. And after that, we will introduce the Board of Directors for NIKLA, National Indigenous Knowledge and Language Alliance.
Morning, Camille. Thank you. I can't turn my video on because the host has disabled my video. So I'll just speak. Oh, she's asked me to start my video. There I am. Hey, Lata. Thank you both for being so gracious as hosts. Good morning, good people. For those of you who are in the East. Shwahayathal Kaswelchalat Palsqui, I carry two ancestral names. Shwahayathal, I carry the name of my people. I'm the woman from Shwai village. Swelchalat means Lady of the Day. It is an honor to be speaking to you this morning from my ancestral home in Shwai village. At the university where I work with Camille Callison, our university librarian, I am simply Shirley Hardman. And that will be the point of my reflection this morning. But first, I would like to thank you all for inviting me to be with you this morning and to help you get started in a good way. I understand that you come from many different places and you work this morning in many different places. Your computer technology is also housed in many different places, depending on the platform you use. And I ask you each to reflect on that, where you are, where you're from, where your data is stored, and where your technology is located. Mm-hmm. It is probable for most of us that the places we will think of will be the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. It is possible that while you reflect, you will find yourself thinking of multiple places, and that is okay. It's the world that we live in today. I'm asking you to reflect on the peoples whose ancestral lands these are. Where you are right now, where you come from, where your cloud is located, where your data is stored, where your tech center is located. Think about that for a minute. If you do not know, stop and reflect on just that. Why don't we know? How might we find out? What you might remember, what you might think about, is the colonization that those particular people in that specific place experienced. Think about what the Indigenous people experienced so that we might have a cloud, a place to work, a place to live, a place to put our technology, to house the machines that make it possible for us to connect this morning. My point of reflection this morning, as I introduced myself, I shared my ancestral names, and I tell you what they mean. And then I tell you that at the university, I am simply Shirley Hardman. When we think about place and the names of these places, do we know what the names were before they were named by the colonizer? The mountains, the trees, the waterways, rivers, lakes, streams, all had names. Indeed, the meadows and the plants likewise had names. They have all, almost all, been renamed. It is like this quiet act of violence, erasing. We have an opportunity to remember, to honor the past, to honor the present and the future by breathing these names into the universe. Using our collective voice, we have the strength to give new life where we are, where we were, where we work, and all of the places that our lives touch. By reflecting this morning and taking the time and making the effort, we can all learn the names of these places. Let that be your act of personal reconciliation. I understand you are meeting about important things this morning. The work you do will create a roadmap for your colleagues across the country to recognize and use words and references that lack reverence and instead turn to respectful terminology in all of your work. I wish you the best as you take on this hard work. I thank you and my ancestors, and thank you for putting your minds and hearts to this important work.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I raise my hand to you and say Madhu for your greeting today to all of us. I turn it over to Jesse now.
Thank you. I would like now to introduce Métis Elder Norma Spicer. Elder Norma Spicer has a passion for Métis history, culture, and customs developed from hearing stories of her ancestors on her mother's side. A descendant of Jean-Baptiste Lagimodière and Marianne Gaboudi through her daughter Josette, and descendant of the Ladue clan from the Slave Lake area on her grandfather's side. Elder Spicer's family history includes those who fought alongside Louis Riel during the Métis resistance. Welcome, Elder Norma Spicer. It is an honor to have you here today with us.
Good morning. I'm honored to be at this important meeting. I'm pleased that you're working towards a consensus to ensure oral histories are preserved and accessible. First Nation, Métis, and Inuit oral histories have been passed down generation to generation. It's been a way of preserving the teachings and stories of our people. These teachings and stories not only speak of our spirituality, language, culture, customs, and traditions, they also tell stories of our homeland, our history, and how we governed ourselves. Most importantly, these oral teachings give an insight to our ways of being, our ways of living, providing an important opportunity for us to give our perspective rather than the written Euro perspective. I'm so grateful that you are looking to digitize our teachings and stories. This is such an important contribution to truth and reconciliation. It would mean that our history is truly heard and acknowledged. Thank you.
So Madhu, Marcy, Norma, for your acknowledgement and your welcome today. And now, since we haven't introduced ourselves, we are going to introduce the entire board of the National Indigenous Knowledge and Language Alliance here today, shortly in a presentation. I'm Camille Collison and co-lead of NIKLA. I am a member of the Tuskegee Crow clan of the Tahltan Nation located in northern BC, the Yukon, and Alaska. And we are the people of the Stikine River, Canada's Grand Canyon. I'm the university librarian at the University of Fraser Valley, located in the heart of Stolo-Tumek's sacred land of the Stolo people, who are also known as the people of the river. And I'm honored to be a guest living and working on their land towards a more respectful, just, and equitable future for all.
I'm Jesse Boiteau. I'm one of the co-leads of NIKLA. I am Métis, and I call Winnipeg home, where I am the senior archivist at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. The NCTR is located on the Fort Garry campus at the University of Manitoba, which is situated on Treaty 1 territory, the original and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation.
I'm Dr. Sabrina Saunders, and I'm the treasurer and a founding member of NIKLA. I'm a Delaware and Mohawk from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, and as the CEO of the Blue Mountains Public Library, I'm happy to live and work on the Georgian Bay in Southern Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and most recently, the Chippewa peoples.
Hi, my name is Feather Miracle. I am Mohawk from Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I am also Odawan Potawatomi from Wikwemikong Unceded Indian Reserve on Manitoulin Island. I am the CEO and Director of Library Services for the Six Nations Public Library. This library is the oldest and largest First Nation public library in the world. I am honored to hold the position of Secretary on the NIKLA Council. I am looking forward to today and the work that we will be sharing in the future. Ona.
I am Donald Johnson. I'm the Archives Community Chair. I'm a member of the Lytton First Nation, located at the confluence of the Fraser and Thompson Rivers. I'm the Special Media Archivist of the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan in Regina. It is located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation.
Hello, my name is Catherine Cole. I'm Métis. I'm a heritage consultant based in Edmonton and also the Director of Planning for the future Nunavut Inuit Heritage Centre that is being developed in Iqaluit. So I'm sorry I can't be with you today because I'm actually in Iqaluit attending meetings. Good luck. Thank you.
I'm Stacey Allison Casson. I'm the Community Chair for Language Preservation and Instruction on the NIKLA Council. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, where I teach in the Library and Information Studies program. And I'm on leave from my position as an associate librarian at York University. And I am very grateful to work and live on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Kwekwe, hello, bonjour. I'm Barbara Filion. I'm a large member of the NIKLA Council representing the institutional voice. I'm the Program Officer for Culture with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, also known as CC-UNESCO. CC-UNESCO acknowledges that our offices, located in Ottawa, are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. The Canadian Commission recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voices and values of our host nation. I'm also a member of the Innu Nation, more specifically of Mashtuiach community of Pequakemi in the province of Quebec.
I am Elaine McGuinness, and I am one of the institutional members at large for NIKLA, representing Dalhousie University. I am originally from New Brunswick and currently reside in Truro, Nova Scotia, which sits in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I am the Associate Dean for Library Services for Dalhousie University, and my portfolio includes Indigenous services.
So thank you so much for being here today, and I'll be talking a little bit now about honoring the past with Dr. Stacey Allison Kassan, and we wanted to welcome you here today. So just a little bit about how this came about is that part of the work of NIKLA is to work with many different communities, but also associations, and that's why we called it an alliance. And so we believe that it's going to take a huge community. And so we have gathered around today around having a national dialogue to start the work of creating really the equivalent of a web of respectful knowledge to be able to imagine how we can move forward with respectful terminology.
So as many of us, just judging from who I can see in the participant list, know that information management relies heavily on identifiers located in classification systems, subject headings, and keywords to provide access to information. But when those identifiers or subject headings or points of access are incorrect, racist, or disrespectful, it affects both the users on a consciously and subconscious level, often reinforcing stereotypes and bias towards other members of society. And Indigenous knowledge and data sovereignty is recognized as a human right. So how do we go about creating systems of respect and the struggle to have our terminology respected? So our meeting today is about intentionally stimulating the movement towards change within cultural memory and information management profession, and the creation of a more respectful metadata and knowledge management systems that we can be proud to pass on to the next generation.
So we are here today actually standing on the shoulders of many giants and people who've been doing this work for almost 50 years now. Starting off really with Brian Deere, a Ganakawagi librarian who created a classification system back in 1974, and many iterations that have happened since, and the work of Dr. Jean Joseph and many other librarians that we are proud to be able to follow in their footprints and to be able to move this forward. So today is really about trying to be able to hopefully create a system that we can be proud to pass on to future generations. So really there's a dark legacy in Canada, and I think the country that we now know as Canada is really something that we have to acknowledge so we can move on. And we know that due to colonization and Canadian laws, specifically the Indian Act, which also prohibited gatherings like the potlatch, Sundance, and other feasts or traditional gatherings, which then led to many of the tangible and intangible knowledges within our communities being held in library archives and museums. And so I believe that we have both play a critical role and we have a responsibility to put these to preserve these and to provide access to them for future generations in a good and meaningful way. So how do we facilitate that back to the communities when we're not speaking in the same language as the communities do, and we're not calling the communities by their own names? So this is really important for cultural and linguistic revitalization for many communities across this country.
So it's important for those working in libraries, archives, and other cultural memory institutions to understand Indigenous peoples' worldview, the validity and dynamic nature of oral traditions, colonization, decolonization, and re-empowerment, and that these are extremely crucial in the collection, curation, and preservation of Indigenous knowledges. And that cultural memory institutions have become very important in reclamation and intergenerational transfer of Indigenous knowledges, languages, and culture.
So part of honoring the past is talking about that past and being truthful about it. And so I really believe, and many of us know, that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC report, and 94 calls to action really provided that catalyst for change in the time in Canadian libraries. At that same time, CLA, the Canadian Library Association, was no longer able to continue, and the Canadian Federation of Library Associations was founded. Within that founding, there was it was ensured that there was an Indigenous representative, and that they would make truth and reconciliation a top priority of that of the association, creating their very first committee, which was the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And that report and actions was answering those calls to action. I was fortunate enough to chair that with 45 people from every province and territory across Canada, and to put forth 10 recommendations in February 2017, some of which are based on today that we're actually working on continually, trying to fulfill those recommendations and calls to move forward within library, archives, and museums. At the same time, many other things were happening across the country. And there had been people active for years trying to put forward having a national Indigenous library, archives, and museums, and a library association. So this was kind of the culmination of a lot of those efforts. And really, NIKLA is the work of us all joining together to be able to make this happen. So within those recommendations, we modeled according to an Indigenous worldview, and created a medicine wheel that was with the work of Elder Norman Mead and Phyllis Caius, which were our elders at the University of Manitoba, where I previously worked before the University of Fraser Valley. And they gave us direction to be able to organize the report and its recommendations from an Indigenous worldview, from using the medicine wheel from the Turtle Lodge, which is located on Saugeen First Nations community. And within this, there was 10 recommendations that came forward, as I just mentioned, and I want you to feel free to go and look those up, and many of you are very well familiar with them. And mostly today, we'll be talking about number 5, which is decolonizing access and classification, and calling Indigenous people by the names that they call themselves.
So this is the recommendation number 2. So we can see that this is a vision for best practices for libraries and archives, and an obligation to protect and preserve. I won't read, actually, I won't read all of them, but I am going to suggest that you go and again, look them up. But it is really about ensuring that Indigenous peoples that our knowledges and traditional knowledges are protected and rights are respected.
Thank you, Stacey. And I think that one of the things moving forward is that because we are talking about that decolonizing of access and classification, and really the existing schemes of knowledge, we know that informational retrieval arise from colonization. And so we want to again commit ourselves to integrating Indigenous epistemologies into cataloging practice and knowledge management. And I think this is a much bigger question of human rights as we move forward. So part of where we came from is to work with some of the existing schemas of knowledge and create working with other communities. And I like to show the one that happened at NFB because it's, well, it seems like it's got a good picture that people seem to relate to. And this is an example of using Indigenous organization and classifications for knowledge. So you can see that it looks much different than the classification schemas that are based on really coming from a male, a white or Caucasian perspective, and usually coming from really Christian perspective often, and really a heterosexual perspective. So we want to acknowledge that these are different systems that we use and to move forward with using ones that actually work for Indigenous peoples to organize their knowledge as well. So at Sorting Libraries Out Symposium, I was fortunate enough to read the address of Dr. Jean Joseph, who is a Wet'suwet'en NIKLA Dene First Nations librarian, who also worked at GBCIC and brought and adapted the Brian Deere classification system for a resource library, and then also adapted it when she was the founding librarian for Wheatwatt Library at the University of British Columbia, which we'll hear from them shortly. But one of the things that really stuck with, I think, everybody there was what she said about one of the most basic acts of respect and recognition for a human being is to be known by your name, and to let our people be known by their own names. And I think that that's really important, and really why we're here today is to talk about that and to talk about ways of coming from a respectful dialogue.
So I know many of you here know of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Indigenous ontology development that took place as part of both the Canadian Federation of Library Associations and NIKLA. And I just want to give a shout out to everyone in the participants list who helped contribute to this project as it stands now. So this was started, I want to say in 2018. I should have written down the date of start, but it was launched officially on June 21st in 2019. And this is an example of some of the names of Nunavut. And I want to give another shout out to Carol Rigby, who did a lot of this particular work. And this ontology, as Camille just put it so well, was really focused originally or as a starting point on naming. And we know that naming is really, really vital to the work that we do in terms of both providing access and being respectful. And so that work took place with that initial launch, and really involved the work of many, many, many people.
So I want to also say thank you so much to all the people that were involved with that. And I think it had a farther reaching, it was farther reaching than I think what we ever thought that it would be, but I'm really grateful for that. And it really came back to relationships, and really what we need to do with Indigenous communities is to create relationships with those communities where we're located on, and the communities that we have their tangible and intangible knowledges in our collections, but also too with Indigenous professionals working in this field. And part of what NIKLA is set out to do is to be a community of practice for Indigenous people and our allies working towards this hopefully more respectful future moving forward. And so NIKLA is really the fulfillment of working on supporting relationship building and the formation of a national Indigenous organization, which was actually recommendation number 2. And I just want to give a little bit more of a timeline so people can read it a little bit better of what went on. And I think this is a really good synopsis, and I shouldn't call it a brief timeline. I forgot to remove that. So because it isn't really a brief timeline. It's been 48 years of people working on this off the side of their desk as volunteers, often taking time away from their families and their communities to do this work. And there's been a very dedicated group of people that continue and keep on advocating for this, but we are still at a place where it hasn't happened yet, and that's why we're here today. So looking at this, I think we can see that there is definitely the desire to create something better and to move forward with this, but we also need to be able to be organized and be able to do that work. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to listen to presentations of work that is ongoing right now and work that has happened to be able to honor that work that others are doing at this time.
So thank you for inviting us today to share our approaches to this work. And we hope that some good collaboration can come out of this meeting today. I'm Anne Carwigan. I'm of Scottish and English heritage, and I moved to these lands as an adult. I've been grateful to Indigenous friends and colleagues to help me along the way. And I'm just going to change the slide. So the University of Alberta Library and the wider university community have made a commitment to decolonization and appropriate Indigenization, and to working with Indigenous communities to make that happen. And our work goes out of that. We've consulted with Indigenous people, and we've developed approaches in our journey to decolonize all of our subject headings and metadata, and implement changes in our ILS. We share our ILS and catalogue with other NEOS libraries. And we also work with 5 First Nations colleges, which is a long-standing relationship since 2006. Nicole Kalanick from Yellowhead Tribal College and Mary Wieselflat from Red Crow College are in our group. And that's enabled a connection to community that would have been very difficult during a pandemic. We've managed to sort of maintain some connection through them. Just going to pass you on to Sharon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anne. And hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Farnell, a white settler of European descent, born and raised in what is now known as Canada. I'm the head of metadata strategies at the University of Alberta Library. And through my work and my research, I've been very fortunate to collaborate with First Nations and Inuvialuit colleagues on aspects of community-driven knowledge organization and resource description. From the beginning, our approach to decolonizing description has been guided by the principle of ongoing and respectful community consultation. The Making Meaning Symposium in 2018 gathered together community members, students, researchers, information workers, and colleagues from across Canada to share concerns around problematic standards and practices, and to build towards shared approaches to addressing them. In 2019, we held 3 knowledge gathering events with campus and local communities to focus specifically on understanding the language that exists in our catalogs and digital collections. From this, we learned of a few specific terms that we could use as a start to begin concrete work on planning and making changes. UAL was actively involved in an Ithaca study in 2019 to understand the needs of Indigenous scholars, and through this was able to engage researchers on the topic of resource description and to gather their input on how we might work together to make positive change. Nicole and Mary, our Indigenous colleagues on the NEOS working group, bring their knowledge and expertise and consult with elders and others within their communities to help inform decisions. Unfortunately, the pandemic struck just as we were planning consultation events with our First Nations college partners, but we hope to broaden and deepen our consultations once again as it is safe to do so. Next slide, please, Anne. Thank you. Our consultation processes have been based on principles of practicing inclusivity and being responsible and giving back to community. The feedback so far, as you can see from these two short quotes from knowledge gathering participants, has been overwhelmingly positive and encouraging of this work. And now I'll pass it over to Brian.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm Brian Stearns, a settler of European descent, born and raised in Ontario. I'm a cataloging librarian at the University of Alberta and also the co-chair of the NIOS Decolonizing Description Working Group. We are evaluating all existing Library of Congress subject headings because our collection is large enough to contain many of them already, and we want to be prepared for future acquisitions at the outset. This is also the best way for us to be able to share our work with others, not being just dependent on our own collection. We're making decisions for each subject heading on an individual basis. We have made a few general decisions, which this slide demonstrates. First, we decided based on our consultations that it was not appropriate to use Indigenous peoples in place of Indians of North America, because that obscures the existence of Inuit and Métis peoples, and that because different terms are used in Canada and the United States, there was not a single term that could replace Indians of North America. So therefore, we decided that we would split that subject heading into both First Nations and Native Americans, while using Indigenous peoples for other places in the Americas. We know that this will require a good deal more work on our part to implement, but we agreed that this was worthwhile to be as accurate as possible. We have not yet fully identified, however, how we will implement the change on a practical level with the numerous additional authority records required. Secondly, we decided that we would replace Indians, Eskimos, etc., following group names with people or peoples. This was largely a practical decision because the proper name remains an adjective since pluralization rules are not consistent for all groups. And this is also something that we intend to revisit after we complete our first version.
Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Wolf, and I am the Senior Librarian in Information Standards at Library and Archives Canada. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land that I am presenting myself today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this important event. CSH is a subject headings list developed by Library and Archives Canada, and it contains over 2,000 subject authority records in the English language on Canadian topics. The list is not intended to be exhaustive. Subject headings are created only as needed. The existing CSH do not reflect current terminology used by First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis Nation for describing material with Indigenous content. The goal is to make the terminology in catalog more accurate and respectful. Ongoing updates are needed to remove bias, improve access, and look for new ways of describing. The way we describe items needs to be revised as well as the vocabulary. LAC cannot improve CSH without the direct contribution of First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis Nation, as well as the library communities. We are grateful for the sharing of Indigenous knowledge from our first discussions that help identify more appropriate terminology. We definitely looked to the examples set by others. Many organizations have created their own ontologies and list of subject headings, like the Manitoba Archival Information Network, the Waywa Library, the FNMI ontology released through NIKLA, and the Greater Victoria Public Library. These provided examples from other organizations doing similar work to help inform our own. As a control vocabulary written in MARC, we do have to follow the same structural rules with LCSH, CSH, and RVM. The revision of existing bibliographic records is possible, but we have to realize that WorldCat is a shared environment. Anyone with an OCLC account can change bibliographic records, including clients who use other vocabularies. Unfortunately, our LEC records are not protected from any third-party corrections. To date, we have modified 115 CSH out of a total of 556. 39 CSH were deleted because a suitable alternative in LCSH was already available. 318 CSH have been added, several of which were lost during the migration to WMS, our new catalog. We still have 30 CSH to change and many more to add, but we need more input from communities to identify the right vocabulary. This is what we are doing right now. To see the complete list of all CSH, please visit our website, mark21.ca. In addition, an Excel list dedicated to Indigenous CSH only is also available at this address. You can see here some examples of updated CSH. Although we had previously revised some literature headings like Canadian Literature, English, Native Authors had been revised to Canadian Literature, English, Indigenous Authors. Upon further reflection, we have decided to remove the word Canadian as an adjective. Thus, using our previous example, Canadian Literature, English, Indigenous Authors, is now Indigenous Literature, English, and may be subdivided geographically as appropriate. Other literature headings are similarly established, like Inuit drama, French, First Nations fiction, Métis essays, English, etc., etc. Note that there are a similar handful of headings in LCSH that follow a similar pattern and can be used where appropriate, such as Inuit poetry for collections of poetry in Inuit languages by multiple authors. Please refer to the CSH authorities for notes and examples of appropriate subdivisions under each heading. There are also some examples of heading like Native Art Canada that we deleted because Indigenous Art Canada was already in LCSH. As an umbrella term, we can use Indigenous peoples or other headings with the word Indigenous, which already exist in LCSH, for work that are about collectively First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations peoples and topics. We can continue to use headings that contains the word Inuit and Métis as appropriate to the work being cataloged. In order to replace the LCSH heading Indians of North America, we created the heading First Nations for works on First Nations peoples and subjects. Geographical subdivision can be added where appropriate to help specify Canada or Canadian jurisdictions. Of course, our goal is to be even more specific. Subject headings for the majority of First Nations communities and languages will be revised on an ongoing basis. Additional CSH will also be created in the near future to allow for greater specificity about communities and geographical regions. We are making these changes with the best of our knowledge. It is important to mention that nothing is final. If an improvement can be made even after modifying a CSH, we will not hesitate to change it again. We will continue to gather input from Indigenous and library communities and others also in order to make appropriate updates. We will work with RVM to recommend equivalents in French and support their efforts to update French headings. We will manually update headings currently in CSH authority records, as well as reviewing together how we describe Indigenous items and how we create Indigenous headings in the future. We cannot, of course, do our entire next steps on our own. We will definitely need input and guidance from the community. We are open to all suggestions. Please do not hesitate to email us and I will get back to you personally. I'm looking forward to learning from you all. Thank you.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Suzanne Briand. Je suis la descendante de colons français du côté de ma mère et de mon père. Je suis née sur le territoire de la belle et généreuse rivière, la rivière Wolastoq, c'est-à-dire dans le bassin versant de la rivière Saint-Jean qui va du fleuve Saint-Laurent jusqu'à la baie de Fundy. Je suis née sur le territoire Wolastoquk. Et ça, je ne le savais pas avant mai 2021.
Mon nom est Chantal Saint-Louis. Je suis également descendante de colons français. Je suis née dans une région que j'ai toujours appelée la Nodière. Je sais maintenant que ce territoire est depuis longtemps habité par le peuple Atikamekw, bien avant l'arrivée de mes ancêtres. Suzanne et moi vivons maintenant et travaillons sur un territoire qui a été habité et traversé et fréquenté par plusieurs Premières Nations. Dans un esprit d'amitié et de solidarité, nous rendons hommage aux premiers peuples de ces lieux, incluant les Huron-Wendat, les Wabanaki, les Inuits, les Atikamekw et les Wolastoquk. Et nous honorons nos relations les uns avec les autres. Depuis une année, nous travaillons à la révision du RVM. Ensemble, avec les autres membres du groupe de travail, nous nous engageons à rendre plus respectueux les mots qui décrivent les réalités autochtones en tant qu'action concrète vers la réconciliation.
Nous allons vous présenter brièvement aujourd'hui notre projet de révision du vocabulaire décrivant les Autochtones dans le RVM. Notre présentation est en français avec quelques mots en anglais. Nos diapos sont en français et en anglais. We are very pleased to be here with you today. It is important for us to be a part of this national initiative. I remind you that RVM is the national French language indexation standard in Canada since 1974. Our presentation will be in French with a few words in English. Our PowerPoint is in both French and English. Donc, comme je viens de le dire en anglais, le RVM est la norme nationale d'indexation en langue française au Canada depuis 1974. Ce matin, dans le RVM sujet, on avait plus de 333 000 vedettes matières. Ces vedettes matières-là proviennent de différentes sources, des traductions et adaptations des Library of Congress Subject Headings, aussi des Canadian Subject Headings. On a des traductions du Medical Subject Headings, qu'on appelle MESH, et aussi du Thesaurus Art and Architecture de la Fondation Getty. Dans le RVM, on a aussi des équivalents Rameau, qui est le Thésaurus de la Bibliothèque nationale de France. Le RVM contient aussi des autorités originales, c'est-à-dire des vedettes matières qu'on a fait expressément pour les besoins de nos clients. Donc, le mandat de notre groupe de travail a été conçu et a été donné par le comité de coordination du RVM. Donc, c'est à l'intérieur de ce cadre-là qu'on se rencontre, qu'on discute, qu'on travaille. Donc, on va vous présenter ce mandat-là. En gros, c'est assister l'équipe du RVM dans la prise des décisions éditoriales visant la révision des vedettes portant sur les Autochtones et de la conseiller sur la meilleure terminologie à utiliser pour décrire les réalités autochtones. Les travaux du groupe de travail se dérouleront selon 2 axes d'intervention. Donc, on va regarder et réviser le vocabulaire générique qui touche plusieurs nations. Et on va aussi réviser le vocabulaire spécifique à chacune des nations. Tout ceci entrepris dans un esprit de dialogue. So, we'll work The work will be done along two axes of intervention: evolution of generic vocabulary and evolution of vocabulary specific to each nation, all undertaken in a spirit of dialogue.
Plus précisément, le groupe de travail doit prendre des décisions éditoriales en lien avec le choix du vocabulaire, de concert avec les représentants des différents groupes. On doit aussi recommander au RVM la meilleure terminologie à utiliser pour décrire les réalités des Autochtones. Il faut également s'assurer que le site du RVM documente la démarche et l'état d'avancement du projet, ce qui est d'ailleurs le cas. Vous pouvez aller visiter le site du RVM pour avoir plus de détails sur le projet. On doit également s'arrimer aux initiatives nationales et internationales sur la révision des vocabulaires décrivant les Autochtones. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour faire cette présentation. Les membres du groupe de travail. Donc, on a la chance de pouvoir travailler sous le marrainage de Michèle Audette, l'honorable Michèle Audette, qui est sénatrice, mais qui est également adjointe au vice-recteur aux études et aux affaires étudiantes ici à l'Université Laval. Dans les membres, donc, on remarque donc des bibliothécaires qui produisent des thésaurus, des vocabulaires contrôlés. On a des bibliothécaires et des techniciens qui utilisent ce vocabulaire-là. On remarque aussi dans le groupe de travail 2 personnes qui sont responsables des services aux personnes autochtones dans les universités, à l'Université Laval et à l'Université Concordia, et une professeure qui s'intéresse depuis longtemps au patrimoine autochtone. On a en fait 2 personnes d'origine autochtone qui travaillent avec nous. Tous les autres membres sont des personnes allochtones. Alors, c'est pourquoi on est toujours à la recherche de personnes d'origine autochtone qui sont intéressées par les enjeux de description et d'analyse des ressources dans les outils de bibliothèque et de centres d'archives. As we are a majority of non-Indigenous, we are looking for Indigenous people interested in issues of resource description and analysis in library and archival tools to come to work with us. On a évidemment pour nos travaux un certain nombre de défis. Alors, en plus du défi du recrutement des personnes autochtones, on doit également composer avec la complexité réglementaire en lien avec la loi sur les Indiens, avec des défis de cohérence historique entre les vedettes matières plus anciennes et les réalités actuelles. Il faut prendre en compte nos biais inconscients et nos angles morts. Et tout ça, en fait, dans les limites de nos propres connaissances des cultures autochtones. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle on veut travailler avec les personnes des communautés pour être capable, en fait, de faire disparaître certains de nos biais. De manière un peu plus technique ou plus proche en fait du travail au RVM, il faut prendre en compte qu'on a une grande quantité de vedettes qui seront à modifier et il faudra s'assurer de reviser les réseaux sémantiques pour qu'ils restent cohérents. Et donc, tout ce travail-là devra être fait de manière manuelle, donc dans la base de données qui est gérée par l'équipe du RVM. Alors, merci beaucoup. Plus de détails sur l'adresse du site web du RVM. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on decolonizing subject headings in Canadiana. I'm Natalie McDonald, the metadata analyst at the Canadian Research Knowledge Network. On behalf of members, CRKN is the steward of the Canadiana collections. I acknowledge I'm a settler and that my work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. My home is located on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. My active work toward reconciliation takes place through research, learning, teaching, and community building. I acknowledge and am thankful for being able to work and live in such a beautiful place and am eternally grateful for being given the gift of breathing the air, eating the food, and using the resources of the land that I get to call home. The Canadiana collections include Heritage and Canadiana. Heritage is a joint project supported by CRKN members and the Library and Archives Canada. Heritage includes 41 million pages of some of Canada's most popular archival collections chronicling the country and its people from the 17th to the mid-20th centuries. Canadiana contains over 19 million pages of digitized historical publications, including monographs, serials, and government publications. The Canadiana collection is the focus of a decolonization project that we've been working on over the last 2.5 years. The Canadiana collections contain content created over 5 centuries that tell an incomplete, oftentimes distorted, and sometimes harmful story of Canada. The content, metadata, and resource descriptions in the Canadiana collection contain language that reflects the biases, norms, and perspectives of the time in which they were created. With the guidance of CRKN's Preservation and Access Committee, CRKN staff are replacing inappropriate language in the metadata and resource descriptions introduced during legacy cataloging practices with interim languages built on community-led work from the GLAM community. We recognize that what we're doing is imperfect, but we wanted to move forward to make an improvement, even though we know it's temporary. One of the first tasks we knew we had to do was determine what work had already been completed. We did not want to repeat valuable work that had been done and did not want to burden Indigenous communities with repetitive consultation. Where possible, we wanted to build on community-led work, especially when that work was Indigenous-led or involved Indigenous consultation. Through Indigenous-focused conference sessions, such as Sorting Libraries Out and the OLA Super Conference, we discovered the Greater Victoria Public Library's interim Indigenous subject headings and the Association of Manitoba Archives changes to Library of Congress subject headings related to Indigenous peoples spreadsheets. During the initial phases of this project, the First Nations Métis Inuit Indigenous Ontology from CFLA was published. We also relied heavily on the knowledge found in the Indigenous Knowledge Organization LibGuide from UBC. We also examined any changes that had been made to LCSH and CSH. There were some subject headings that had been updated, but many were not consistent across the community-led vocabularies. Since we knew we wanted to be as respectful as possible with our interim changes, and it was guaranteed that some terms wouldn't yet be updated in LCSH and CSH, we decided to focus on the community-led work and use that as a basis to our changes. The next decision we had to make was how to implement changes within our MARC records in a way that followed MARC 21 standards and made the most sense for our organization. CRKN creates our records using MARC 21 formatting and RDA standards. The subject fields in MARC 21 are in the 600s, and most of the subject headings we worked on for this project were in the 650 field. We decided to enter all changes related to decolonizing as a /4. This keeps them consistent within our records. We also kept thorough documentation of our changes so that when an official vocabulary is created, we can easily pull the records and make additional changes where needed. This way, we don't have to worry about conforming to LCSH and CSH terminology, and we can focus on getting the terminology as respectful as possible. So at this point in the project, we knew where our initial vocabulary was going to come from and how we were going to implement our changes in MARC records. The next step was to focus on our own collection to determine what we had and what changes we could make in order to produce a project plan. The first task was to figure out exactly what we had in our records. I started by exporting all subject headings. This was a 339-page PDF document, which I then converted to Excel. For the next step, I tried to find shared terminology across the vocabulary lists I was using from other organizations to pull out Indigenous-related terms. I highlighted any subject heading that had any of the words Indian, Aboriginal, Eskimo, Inuit, Métis, First Nation, and Native. This found most of the subject headings. I then highlighted based on community and language names. And at this point, I was satisfied with the result and moved on. Of course, there are likely subject headings that I missed, but I hoped they would be picked up in later steps when I did quality checks on the records where I was making changes. The result was that I had 1,575 Indigenous-related subject headings. So after the initial assessment of our subject headings, we produced an implementation plan for review and approval by the Preservation and Access Committee. The Preservation and Access Committee reviews and makes recommendations regarding the development and management of Canadiana. We produced an approach that we felt would make the biggest impact the fastest. We recommended performing changes in 3 phases. Phase 1 is updating all Indians of North America subject headings with Indigenous peoples. Phase 2 is removing Indian from all community names and updating community names to reflect current usage and spelling. Phase 3 is updating all remaining subject headings and any leftover from Phase 1 and 2 that required more research. The Preservation and Access Committee approved the plan and we were set to start working. So I started to match the main subject headings in our Excel file to the main subject headings from the Greater Victoria Public Library and the Manitoba Archives spreadsheets. Anytime a main subject heading was not available on either list, I would try to build it myself using Indigenous community websites and other Indigenous resources, such as in the Indigenous Knowledge Organization page from UBC's Waywell Library. I also enlisted the help of our full-time cataloger and with some of the more complex headings, such as Bible-related terms. She was able to do the research while I continued with the list, and the result was a spreadsheet seen in this slide. Once I finished the initial match, I started to merge any term that was the same from GVPL and Manitoba. All of our subdivisions were not represented in the community-led spreadsheets, which is not a surprise. Going from Indians of North America to Indigenous peoples removes the geographical portion of the main heading. So the geographical portion needs to become a subdivision. We had to go through each subject heading to match it to the structure of LCSH. We followed the structure of LCSH when formatting these subject headings, and in this example, you can see that anthropometry comes before the geographical subdivision, and antiquities comes after. Each subject heading was examined individually to determine where the geographical subdivision should be placed. One challenging aspect of this project is the bilingual nature of the Canadiana MARC records. All records, regardless of language, have both French and English subject headings. And there hasn't quite been as much community-led work done on the French equivalents, so we worked with our colleagues, consulted with French speakers outside of CRKN, and focused on Indigenous community websites for translation. So we got to a point where we were happy with what we had for Phase 1 changes. And at this point, I exported all the MARC records with Indians of North America and batch updated them using my spreadsheet. Once I had the files ready, I processed them in the platform and they showed up online. We continued to work on matching terms and doing more research, and we finally got to a point where we had a match for most of the subject headings that were in our catalog. We decided that when we announced the changes to our catalog, that we would also share the spreadsheet. The goal of sharing the spreadsheet is to provide greater transparency to our work and to aid catalogers pursuing decolonization and equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives at their own institutions. The spreadsheet is a living document and should not be considered exhaustive or definitive. It will be updated as language changes or when an updated national vocabulary is created. So now I'll talk about the next further steps in the project. This work is ongoing and will never be complete. In the context of this specific project, we're working on Phase 2, which removes the term Indian from all community names and updates the community names to current spelling and diacritics. During this phase, we've been flagging specific names and producing a consultation plan in order to begin discussions about preferred names. For example, we would like to include both Cree and Nahiawak in our records, but would first like to hear from community about their preferences. Once Phase 2 is implemented, we will begin the final phase of the subject headings project. CRKN acknowledges the need for national solutions to harmful and inappropriate subject headings and resource descriptions, and for respectful terminology for Indigenous peoples and all who have been marginalized or inappropriately represented in the history of Canada. Our long-term vision is to examine and update other fields in our descriptive records and evaluate how we classify and organize items in Canadiana. So if you have any feedback, questions, or want to collaborate, please feel free to reach out to me at nmacdonald@crkn.ca. Thanks.
I'm Alyssa Cherry, and I'm very lucky to both work and live on Musqueam territory. I work at the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, and I'm talking to you today from my house in Musqueam Reserve number 4 is right behind me on the other side of the river. It's an honor to be able to talk to this group today, and it's so incredible that so many people from all over the country are gathered together to talk about respectful terminology and developing a national framework. Almost 10 years ago, when I worked for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, we did a revision of the Brian Deere classification. And I am so grateful to the support I received on that from many heavy hitters, including Camille Collison, who donated many hours of her time, often after hours and on weekends, from Dr. Jean Joseph, who reviewed our classification and provided very thoughtful input. And we even got the blessing from Brian Deere himself for that project, which was a thrill. And while I'm very glad to have done that project, I'm not joking when I say that it took me years to recover from it. It was an insane amount of work, and it really did burn me out. It was about 2 years of going full tilt on that project to get it done. And burnout is a real problem for a lot of us. I know the people that were responsible for getting NIKLA off the ground and for organizing this gathering largely did so off the sides of their desks and on personal time. So I am hopeful that as more people get involved and that we can hopefully secure the resources we need to really push things forward, that burden can be lifted from those people that have been pushing this forward for all of these years. So in the not too distant future at the museum, we're going to be facing some major systems changes. And that is going to be an opportunity to improve our controlled vocabulary across all of our collections. This includes the belongings that are held in the museum collection, our archival management database, our digital asset management system, and our library catalog. And we're also considering reclassifying the library as well, possibly as soon as next year. So my head does start to kind of spin when I think about all of the work that's going to be involved in a project like that. I get tired just thinking about it, but I am hopeful that by working together and pooling our resources, that the project won't be as bad as it was 10 years ago. So a vetted ontology, something that builds upon the work that was done through the Indigenous Matters Committee, would make implementing the kind of changes that we like to see so much easier. So it's very bad timing. I wish I could be there with you all today, but I'm traveling and out of the country. But I do look forward to contributing and supporting this work however I can in the future. This is important work. It needs to be taken very seriously. But I want to remind you all to not work too hard and to try to have a little bit of fun along the way.
Hello, my colleague Heather Dunn and I appreciate the opportunity of presenting our project. I would like to acknowledge that since I am in Ottawa, I am on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. The presentation will cover some of the opportunities and challenges of including Indigenous concepts and terminology within nomenclature from museum cataloging. First, I will give a brief introduction to nomenclature to help you understand what it is for now and how it is used. I'll talk about our current approach and limitations, as well as some recent opportunities. And finally, we will cover some of the challenges and questions we are facing. So nomenclature for museum cataloging is a bilingual English-French vocabulary and classification system used to catalog objects in human history collection. It has been used since 1978 across Canada and the US by historic sites, history and ethnology museum, and local history societies, cataloging historical and ethnological collection. Chen has been working for many years in partnership with the American Association for State and Local History and Parks Canada to develop and maintain nomenclature. Nomenclature contains more than 15,000 object names organized within a simple hierarchical classification system that groups like objects by their functional context. Nomenclature is available within most commercial museum collections management systems. It is available under an open license, CC BY, as a searchable online web application. And also it's also available in a variety of downloadable file formats, including linked data formats. The open license means that anyone can use, share, and adapt nomenclature. Collections management software can use it freely and make it available to museums. CHIN is working to open a Sparkle endpoint in the near future to allow easier integration with museum systems so they can update the vocabulary live without downloading it. In the web application, users can search nomenclature to find the terminology they need for consistent cataloging. Images are included where available. Users can also browse the nomenclature hierarchy to find the terms they need. For example, if they don't know what the object is called, but they know what it is used for, they can browse through the functional categories to find a specific term they need. In addition to the terminology and classification system, nomenclature also includes a full bibliography, a user guide, an integration page that provides options for download and other ways to use nomenclature, as well as an update section, including a list of addition and changes. Oops. Nomenclature is continually developed and maintained by the Nomenclature Committee and the Canadian Nomenclature Committee. If there's a term that your museum needs that you cannot find in nomenclature, you can submit it for consideration using the forms link at the footer of every page of the website. We know that the inclusion of Indigenous terminology in nomenclature is of interest to many nomenclature users, including museums and heritage centers that are working toward decolonization and users in Indigenous community. We are interested in adding Indigenous terms in for existing nomenclature concepts, but also would like to add any potential new concept that are missing from nomenclature that are needed to represent important Indigenous objects. CHIN and the Nomenclature Committee will not seek out Indigenous partners to help with this work, but will wait to be approached by interested community representatives that wish to be involved. For giving Indigenous language, the community should be giving authority over the terminology in their language. Our vocabulary management system, which is pulled party by the Semantic Web Company, came out of the box with the ability to handle a large number of different languages. But North American Indigenous languages were not among them. We asked for a customization to include 40 of the most commonly spoken North American Indigenous language. As you can see in this screenshot, in the inset, we have entered a few terms in Cree, just as a test to see how it would handle the languages. At present, we are including the term in syllabics as well as in Latin script. It's possible to search by the syllabic representation and by the Latin representation. I'll come back to the use of the non-preferred terms in a few minutes. We are now working with the vendor of the vocabulary management system to include the ability to handle the syllabics in a separate field instead of putting the Latin scripts in brackets after the syllabic. As with any classification system, nomenclature is organized following a certain viewpoint with a focus on the functional context of objects. Obviously, functional context is just one of many ways that objects might be organized. The concepts within nomenclature are found across cultures. For example, we all know that the concept of a chair, no matter what terms we use to refer to it in our own language, But since nomenclature functional classification system was developed within the colonial context over 40 years, it is likely that it will not align with the many different Indigenous worldviews or the many different non-Indigenous worldviews for that matter. But shared terminology across languages for object name is powerful, even if we don't always agree on classification. So the government of Nunavut has approached us with an offer to include some terms in Inuktitut in nomenclature. The heritage centers across Nunavut would likely make use of the Inuktitut terms, as might the Nunata Museum in Iqaluit. There is also the possibility that Inuit cultural organizations in other territories or provinces might make use of these terms. So far, they have contributed 2 terms, both for existing nomenclature concepts, but are hoping to hire an Inuktitut speaker to coordinate a project to add more terminology over time. So we hope that this project could be a path for other Indigenous groups to follow in order to add their own language terms. Some of the challenges and questions we are facing include how to handle the many dialects within a language. We can tag a term as Inuktitut or Western Canadian Inuktitut, but there are many dialects even with those subgroupings. In English and French, when there are regional differences across Canada, we choose just one variant that is recommended for cataloging, and the other variants point people to that one. Can we do the same with Inuktitut, or are the linguistic differences between regions too great? Should there be tagged as a separate language? What if multiple Indigenous groups from a single language disagree on the proper term for a concept? We hope that one day there could be a committee for each language as there is for English and French terminology. We do not currently have Indigenous representation on the Nomenclature Committee or the Canadian Nomenclature Committee, but we would like to. If you are interested in joining one of the committee, please do not hesitate to contact us. Nomenclature does not currently include plurals. Inuktitut has different terms for 2 versus 3 or more objects. Should these be included, and how to manage this? The current convention in nomenclature is to refer to the one term per language that is recommended for cataloging as the preferred term, and the other variants, which are not recommended as indexing terms, are as non-preferred terms. The non-preferred terms serve to point people to the single preferred term for the concept, helping to standardize terminology for improved access to collections information within and across museums. But we are concerned that calling other variants of a term non-preferred might be an uncomfortable fit when there are significant regional linguistic differences within a language, in English and French as well as in Indigenous languages. So we are planning to change this from non-preferred to alternative term to be more respectful and inclusive of variation. The fact that museums are using a vocabulary standard such as nomenclature means that whatever variant of the term is used, it will still be found in the museum information system. So thank you. So if you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact us.
So now I'd just like to introduce Sarah Dupont from Witwa Library, and she's going to share a presentation. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Camille. I'll just put my PowerPoint up and we'll get rolling. So thank you so much again, Camille, for the invitation to be at this gathering and to share some of the work that's happening at the University of British Columbia and a little bit through COPL as well. What you see here is the new COPOL website and the Indigenous Knowledges Steering Committee. We have a section there. I've been chair of that committee for about 5 years now. And one of our priorities has to do with respectful terminology. And the event that we most recently held, it was actually about this topic. And as such, Camille invited my colleague Sue Andrews and I to give kind of an overview of what we spoke about. But I just want to acknowledge the other presenters who are on that panel and thank them again, many of whom who have spoken here today, for participating and sharing their good work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah DuPont, and I'm the head librarian of the Huihua Library at UBC, which has been mentioned a few times today. So thank you so much, everybody, for the acknowledgement of work that has happened before I became head. And it's really, really an honor to stand on the shoulders of people who came before me. I'm Métis on my father's side and settler Canadian on my mother's side. Before I launch into any more slides, I just wanted to point out that there is a recording available of the panel that I was just speaking about. So if you would like to get more detail, and I hope this presentation leaves you with a bit of a thirst for that detail. I really have to thank Sue Andrews for putting together such a wonderful primer for those of us who are non-catalogers or are non-technical services people. She put together really some of the technical breakdowns for why the decolonization of the description is just one part of the work that we're looking at doing. And of course, I have construction happening at my condo. So if you'd like to learn more about what Sue had to say in more depth, I've really pared it down, but I would encourage you to check out that recording. I also want to acknowledge that every single one of these slides pretty much is from Sue Andrews as well. So I am just here to channel her voice as an inadequate substitute, but also to thank her as a wonderful teacher. If you don't know Sue Andrews, you're missing out. I have had the benefit of learning so much from her in such a short amount of time. And I really look forward to learning even more with her as we approach a very exciting time for UBC Library, where we are about to post for an Indigenous metadata librarian. So our friend at the University of Calgary, Kaya McLeod, who is, I believe, the inaugural Indigenous metadata librarian in Canada, she will have a friend on the other side of the mountains who will be able to speak metadata with her as well. So without further ado, one of the things that Sue really highlighted for us in this presentation is that when we're looking at terms that need review and possible replacement, it's not always a find and replace. And this is for a variety of reasons. And she used 4 different thesauri to illustrate this. So Library of Congress subject headings, the medical subject headings, Canadian subject headings, and ours, the First Nations House of Learning subject headings at Huihua Library. This is because we have our own set of hierarchies, so broader and narrower terms. That is a really important architecture of a thesaurus, if you're not aware. So being able to really illustrate the how-to for the cataloger to implement a thesaurus, it's done through decisions that are made about broader and narrower terms and other different types of terms as well. So the preferred terms in one list, they might not be the same or equivalent to the preferred terms in another list. See and see also references are also part of those thesauri constructs, and they will be found in authority records, not always in subject headings. And finally, words that we may wish to change, they may occur in different places in subject strings dependent on the thesaurus. So you can't just do that find and replace. You have to do that really detailed looking to make sure that you get all the terms changed out in the correct way that you intend to. So this is illustrated on the following slide. Here are some of those long strings of subfield possibilities. And terms that we may wish to replace can be in multiple field and subfield types, and in multiple positions. Subtopics and genre forms may also need attention. For example, kings and rulers is often used, it's the Library of Congress subject heading in place of chief, which isn't appropriate. Discovery and exploration, that language is colonial. We have folklore and legends to talk about our truths, our histories, and our creation stories. Chronology related to Canada and its provinces and territories is something that Sue also flagged as needing perhaps some of our attention. For example, there are spans of time that really have to do with the colonial calendar and timeline of Canada's existence. But what do we mean by Canada, and what's meaningful to us as Indigenous people? So a few more challenges. The discontinued headings from one vocabulary in favor of headings from a different vocabulary. There's a bit of a communications concern that catalogers need to be kept up to date. When the authority record disappears, when the new term comes up in another vocabulary, if it's not widely publicized among the wonderful catalogers in Canada, how are they going to know that a change has been made? So that's an ongoing concern for catalogers everywhere, I'm sure, but particularly it's something that we may want to plan for as sustainability for a project going forward. Also, global change limitations in databases are also governed by authority records, as we know, but changing a Canadian subject heading authority, for example, changing this record in WorldCat won't automatically change all bibliographic records containing that string, only those that have controlled subject headings. So in finding solutions, Sue and I had several good chats, and we thought first, identifying the source of subject headings for users is a really big part of figuring things out together. So Sue is very persistent, and she had the tenacity to work again with the folks in our IT department to have the thesaurus display as a subheading and group the subject headings under it. And we did this in a ranked order as well. So we were able to put ours, the First Nations House of Learning Kwikwah subjects first, followed by the Canadian subject headings if they are in the record, and then the Library of Congress. We also spoke a lot about people. And Sue has done some really great work in illustrating the hierarchical look at names. She's put together some really great graphics. For example, these are the Canadian subjects headings since summer 2021. And it looks, you know, as we would expect it to, with Indigenous Peoples Canada up at the top, First Nations Canada, Métis and Inuit in the second hierarchy. But then there's some interesting results as we drill further down into the names of peoples. And for example, we don't use Carrier or Nootka Indians anymore, but they're still there. But the Nishka folks and the Kainai, those are, you know, better names, although Indians is still in Nishka in the CHS. So, you know, there's some opportunities there to perhaps make some adoption of whatever is decided. And hopefully the ontology is a really great piece of research that can be looked to for that. But at Quechua Library, we did things a little bit differently. We have Aboriginal Canadians up at the top, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But then in our tertiary level of this hierarchy, we've got Daketh instead of Carrier, Nuu-chah-nulth, and Nishka. So it's just another way to illustrate that there is a lot of work to do, and consistency of doing it isn't necessarily going to happen without some conversations and getting together, and ultimately will involve decision making, and that might lead to a little bit of discomfort along the way, but it's also very exciting to think about having a thesaurus that people can go to and be confident in and know that communities have approved of. So I've already kind of illustrated this by speaking about it. So I'll just move to the next slide. The Quechua Library also did a list of names, and you may wonder why we did one kind of in parallel, in tandem with the good work taking place with the ontology teams. And we did things a little bit differently. We focused on trying to create that structure with our see alsos and broader term, narrower term. And, you know, in so doing, we don't have as much detail with the tribal group names, the band names, the treaty. You know, there's a lot of that detail in the Indigenous ontology, which is really fantastic. And so when I asked Sue about, you know, why didn't we take those further steps? Why didn't we do that? It's so obvious that there's a lot more information that's missing. And that's when my awareness of authority records came into existence, thanks to Sue. So there are different ways to bring those terms into the controlled vocabulary. And it was really like a light bulb moment for me. And it's an opportunity for us to think about how to use all these pieces together: subject headings, classification, and authority records, to really be accurate and respectful at the same time. So there are some ideas that, you know, Sue and I have bounced around, but we're really excited to hear what others have to say. That's about the North American name authority files. I'm probably running a bit low on time, so I'll just kind of leave you to skim that quickly. But I really wanted to talk about our idea, and I'm sure a lot of you have had this idea as well, about perhaps, you know, we should do something with Indigenous languages, as well as including geographic name authorities in these authority files. And I'm thinking back to our first elder this morning and how she was talking about the importance of the place names and how colonization has just really decimated our knowledge of those place names. And I'm really excited for a future that hopefully includes thinking about how to reclaim those place names and have them in authority records or whatever else might be best for them to be represented in our records. One example that Sue had pulled for names of places specifically was Kamloops. This comes from the geographic, there's an authority group, a national authority group that has geographic terms. And there are a couple there, but not the Indigenous named Kamloops. So, I mean, that it feels like such an easy thing that perhaps we could do. I know it's not easy because this work never is, but I'm really inspired and really hopeful and excited to work with you all. So with that, again, I just want to raise my hands to Sue Andrews and encourage you to go to the COPL website, down to the Decolonizing Description page for the Indigenous Knowledge Steering Committee, where you will find a link to the video and you can hear her speak to all these things in much greater clarity and depth. And I thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I think we've all been talking about many of these things for many years. And thank you for wrapping up that session. As you note that many people are working on this in many different areas. And for right now, we actually want to, we'll address that as well too. But I also wanted to make quick note of saying thank you to everyone at the that presented for us, and I really appreciate all of you for coming, and I raise my hands to you and thank you for those presentations. As you can see, many different libraries and organizations have been working on Indigenous subject headings and classification and access points for many years, but in silos. And smaller organizations don't have the funding to be able to do this work. So, and many Indigenous communities don't have the funding to be able to do this. And the wonderful thing that legacy that Brian Deere and Dr. Jean Joseph left us was beautiful systems of knowledge that can be adapted for other people. And that's really the beauty of them, is that they're flexible and can be adapted across nations, and they can be converted to many different Indigenous languages, and also too come from different places, but they all come from an Indigenous worldview that we can work together to be able to create that respectful dialogue. And notably, the work on the Indigenous or First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Indigenous ontology did have geographical indicators in it to be able to ensure that we were able to locate people and where they are located, and also too numerous AKAs in them as well too. So I believe that right now, part of our work is to really try to imagine a future moving forward past that. And I think with that, I'm going to just charge everyone to kind of think about imagining the creation of a respectful framework of descriptors, identifiers, and keywords that leave an imprint of reverence. And that's really where we want to go with this for all others in the way that we organize our information. And I think I'm going to invite Stacy to also reflect on some of this work as well too.
Sure. Now, just before I want to see something, I'm going to ask that we're launching a poll. So just to maybe wake everyone up a little bit after all those fantastic presentations. So you will see a poll now on your screen, and we invite you to participate in that poll. Pretty simple. What sector you work in, are you a NIKLA member, just some easy questions. So thank you. I see, so many people filling out the poll, so that's great. And I just want to echo what Camille has said, and also to thank everyone for presenting the work that they are doing across Canada. There are we've been having these meetings, I think every couple of years, it seems like, to get together and have these discussions. So I'm really grateful to hear all the work that everyone's doing, and to think about how we can also unite that work and work in a Leslie, more than one sector. What do you mean? So if you work in more than one sector, I don't know, pick your favorite if you can. You'll have to make a choice. I'm sorry, it might be a hard choice. So let's see, we have 88% of people have participated. So thank you very much. I'm going to end that poll now. All right. And with that, I think we are going to go and head into a break. I'm just going to look at Camille. Is that right, Camille? You can
yes,
nod.
I think.
Yes. So this right now we're having a break up until, so 10-minute break. So please step away from the screen, and we'll see you back here about, well, it's 1:25 my time. Please make the adjustments for your time zone, but in about, let's say about 11 minutes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for that. Sorry about that little glitch, but please do imagine the creation of a respectful framework as you go into the break. And I know we have a beautiful song and video Human by Twin Flames, so that we can enjoy that music during the break, and just thinking about what it means to respect others as human beings.
Well, welcome back from the break, everybody. I hope you had a chance to grab some more coffee or from some tea and take a break from the screen for a bit. Now that we are back, we are going to do another poll. So if you can get ready for that, and we'll take a few minutes for everybody to, do your best to pick what works for you, and we'll just take a few minutes. So I'll just read out the questions for everybody. So question 1, have you done work in this area? Number 2, did you feel supported in your efforts? 3, are or were Indigenous knowledge professionals involved in your project? And we'll just take some time for all of that for everybody to answer. Okay, thank you. Almost there. Maybe this is a test to see who's back from the break.
So I just wanted to also just let you know in advance, and we are doing polls, and we will be heading soon to the breakout rooms and listening sessions. And we just wanted to let you know that that NIKLA, the National Indigenous Knowledge and Language Alliance, is recording this event, and that additionally, many of these voluntary polls will be included as well in the proceedings from this event. Also, too, that the research content gained throughout the breakout rooms and listening sessions, we will be using as part of funded or unfunded research in the future, because we want to be able to use what we gather here as we continue to move forward. And so it really is about justifying the fact that a national framework for terminology is needed, and that many people are asking for that to happen and for this work to be done, so that we can move forward with that. So participation is voluntary. If you want to add your views to the sticky notes in the Jamboard or not, but and also too in the polls as well too, because we will be using this as further justification for hopefully gaining funding to do this project. Thank you.
All right.
So there's a question in the break in the chat as well, so I thought I would address it for everyone.
Thank you, Camille. And I think everybody can see the results of that poll. So thank you again to everybody who participated, but of course, participation through any of these means, as Camille said, is voluntary, but we greatly appreciate it. Before we go into our breakout sessions, we do want to let you know that there are resources available should anything be triggering. We are going to be talking about things that can be potentially distressing to some people.
Sorry about that. I just, I wanted to make sure that people know that we do know that some of the terminology that we may ask you about and the questions in the breakout room may also trigger responses, both for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. But we do have the school crisis line that will help people to be able to work through some of the terminology that we have. And with that, I think that we will be moving towards the breakout rooms, and we asked you to imagine the future of a national framework for terminology and the vision for that. And as we can see through all of this work, that coming from an Indigenous worldview is a worldview of respect, and respect for all peoples, and respect for creation really in general. And we would like to be able to create something that's uniquely Canadian, including with inclusion of everyone and all of the terminology. So it's really an important and momentous project that we are attempting to bring people together to work on. But I think it's very important for us to leave this for future generations. So we ask that you would join us in those breakout rooms now, and we will be in them for approximately 25 minutes, and then we will come back and listen to presentations so somebody said that they're not actually hearing me speak, but I hope most people can hear me. And then we will come back and listen to another presentation, then tabulate what we heard in the speaking in the listening sessions, and give that back to everyone before we have a closing look at what a respectful terminology framework could look like. And thank you. I'm glad everyone can hear me. So anyway, thank you very much. And I guess we'll be moving to the breakout rooms now. So I can see that everyone is back, and thank you so much for all your contributions, Madhu. I raise my hands to all of you for participating, and I appreciate that today. It will definitely give us direction as we move forward, and the justification for working on this and creating a national framework so that others can use it and adapt it as they see fit. So I really appreciate that. I think that we're going into another break now, because we have another break with some music for you while we work very hard on tabulating the results to do a report out. But right after the break, we'll have and some other examples of some from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and an example from a really recent report on reimagining descriptive workflows as well too. So I'm going to move everyone to break now, and if all the facilitators can join me in the facilitators breakout room, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, when do you return? The break is for 15 minutes, so I'm sorry for not giving you the time. So in British Columbia, it is 11 o'clock right now. So it would be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will break until 11:15 or 2:15 in EST. Thank you.
Yes, I agree, Norma, with the fiddling. I'm just looking at the chat. So welcome back, everyone. For sure, be great to hear some fiddling. That means we'll have to have another meeting sometime soon so we can hear more music. So welcome back from the break. As Camille mentioned just before we went out for our break, we are coming back to hear some further perspectives on work that is happening. And I'm going to pass it over to Camille to say a few things before we go into the videos.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. And it would be great to hear fiddling as well, too. I wanted to agree with that. I really miss that from living in Winnipeg, being able to hear the fiddle music. But we definitely need to have more of these types of gathering. This is really the first of many types of gathering of this nature, or at least we hope that it will be. I would like to introduce the next part of our program, which is really to listen to some of the work that they're doing at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And I believe we have a presentation now from Jesse on that work.
Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to participate in today's event. I am presenting to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba, located on Treaty 1 territory, the original ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. The topic of today's event is one that is very close to my heart and something that is often discussed at the NCTR archives as we process and make accessible the millions of records collected by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the NCTR in more recent years as we continue our document collection efforts. Today, I will be providing a brief overview of some of the theory that informs our work, some examples of how this theory is put into practice, and finally, some next steps as we look to the future and the role of archives in working alongside Indigenous communities conducting research into unmarked burials and the development of their own archives. The Reconciliation Framework for Canadian Archives, written by the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives, includes a section on arrangement and description in which they state that the Canadian archival community shall integrate Indigenous perspectives, knowledge, languages, histories, place names, and taxonomies into the arrangement and description of Indigenous-related archival materials and collections. One strategy that they suggest to achieve this goal is to reassess the foundations of archival arrangement theory and practice. Current archival arrangement structures are based on the idea of individual authorship. Engage in critical discourse to understand the implications of this assumption when working with Indigenous-related archival materials. An important first step in addressing this call to action to decolonize archival description or develop respectful terminology is to deconstruct colonial records as a way of confronting colonial truths and narratives to create space for the individuals and communities listed within these records. In the past, if these individuals or communities were acknowledged at all, they were seen as simply the subjects of these records. But I argue that these individuals, or authorities or entities using archival jargon, must be seen as active participants in the creation of archival records. By doing so, we can begin to understand who has been affected by these colonial records and whose voices are missing from the narratives or archival description. When approaching the deconstruction of a record, it is important to understand who is related to the record, what is the nature of the relationship between that individual and the record, and where are they from, as in what is their home community. In addressing the idea of community authorship, the steering committee poses the following question. What happens to our structural understanding of archival materials once the concept of creation is redefined and authorship is assigned to an Indigenous community rather than the archives or individual creator? My answer to that question looks something like this. In this diagram, the colonial context of the RCMP as the creator of this government record is retained. However, this context is now challenged by the related individuals and communities that played an active role in the events documented in this particular record. Now, the term archival authority or authority record will come up throughout the presentation And essentially what this means is an individual, an organization, an institution, a community that is related to a record. Using Western archival theory, that's generally related to the individual or organization that created a record. But what we're doing now in this deconstruction of colonial records is expanding our understanding and definition of an archival authority to be more inclusive of those listed within the record. So once a colonial record has been deconstructed, the pieces we are left with can then be arranged in a way that takes into account the plurality of provenance in archives. So understanding that there is more than one provenance of a singular record. There is the provenance from the government perspective, whereas there's also provenance from the Indigenous community perspective. What this allows us to do is find new ways of connecting related records and authorities where connections were previously overlooked. So for example, if someone is looking at a government record in the NCTR archives, the description itself has been provided from a colonial perspective using non-respectful terminology. Yet this can be juxtaposed by navigating to the related Indigenous community authority record. From here, one can access Indigenous perspectives through audio-visual survivor statements that offer a sort of counter-narrative to challenge government-issued descriptions. And then to gain more contemporary perspectives, archives should work with Indigenous communities to include links to their community websites and Facebook pages within their community authority page, rather than following archival instincts to document a group of people using our words instead of their own. Now moving on from theoretical diagrams to practice, one example I would like to share is our ongoing work to have Indigenous representation in the place access point taxonomies of our ATOM, or Access to Memory, archival database. Here you can see an aggregation of 163 records related to the Sechelt Nation in British Columbia. This is one example where we previously had a single place access point for the town of Sechelt, using the colonial spelling to link archival records to this community. Upon further research into First Nations communities across Canada, including use of NIKLA's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Indigenous ontology, we realized that the distinct community of the Sechelt Nation was not being represented in our descriptions. So because of this, we created two distinct place access points to differentiate between the Sechelt Nation and the town of Sechelt. In this screenshot, you can see how this looks in the access point section of one of our record descriptions. Here you can see that we have chosen to create separate taxonomies for Indigenous versus non-Indigenous communities to avoid arranging self-governing communities into hierarchies with provincial jurisdiction. Instead, we're using treaty access points to arrange Indigenous communities, and since the Sechelt Nation has not signed a treaty, their place access point is linked to the general unceded territory as the broader term. A second example is how we highlight the relationships between records and record sets to help contextualize the material objects gifted to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. On the screen, you can see the description for the expression of reconciliation from survivor Theodore Ted Fontaine, which includes 11 individual parts, ranging from his memoir Broken Circle to a broken fence post from the Fort Alexander Residential School in Manitoba. These 11 objects have been arranged into a single record to preserve how it was originally gifted as a single bundle, yet each individual part has its own description for additional detail. On this page, you can also see that we've added in additional links to the TRC Event Authority and the video of Ted's gifting ceremony within the archival history section for easy access and discoverability. You can also click on Ted's authority record to access other videos, records, and photos related to Ted. In this screenshot, you can see the relationship between this gift and other archival records, such as photographs from the national event where the gifting ceremony took place, and finally the video of Ted providing his gift to the Bentwood box. We're also working to create authority records for the individuals and organizations that participated in the gifting of expressions of reconciliation to the TRC. So this includes working closely with hundreds of Indigenous organizations and communities to ensure they are being represented in a way that speaks to their cultural values and worldviews. So rather than attempting to paraphrase the meaning and significance of Ted's gift to the bentwood box, we chose to make a direct link between the description of the objects themselves and the audiovisual record. There's quite simply no substitution for the value that this type of video brings to an archival description. And by creating this link, we still preserve the context of the TRC's acquisition process, while at the same time lifting up the voices of those who lived these experiences firsthand. Respectful terminology at the NCTR is less about redescribing millions of records, which loses the original colonial context and intent of the government and church, but rather layering Indigenous perspectives, using their own words wherever possible, as a way of being respectful while ensuring we never forget the original intent of the residential school system in Canada. Finally, respectful terminology is not simply how we describe records or utilize subject headings. Currently, there are dozens of lead communities taking on the challenge of researching unmarked burial sites and missing children related to residential schools in Canada. Agreements are being drafted between communities and cultural institutions, including the NCTR, to provide access to the very records that communities require to conduct a thorough research investigation using a combination of community knowledge and archival and other materials. We must be mindful that the language we use in our agreements can either be seen as adversarial or meaningful toward building long-lasting relationships. Now more than ever, there is a need and a willingness to develop these respectful and reciprocal relationships between Indigenous communities and cultural institutions such as libraries, museums, and archives. We must ensure that our language is respectful as we work to reconcile with the role that our professions have played in the colonization of Canada. By doing so, we will build opportunities to have more Indigenous representation in our collections. Thank you so much for listening. It was truly an honor to participate in today's workshop.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to join you here today to talk about the Reimagined Descriptive Workflows project, which was a project to better understand and address harms caused by cultural institutions' collection description practices. I'm going to be talking to you about the project and also the report that we just recently issued as a result of this funded phase of work, but also work that's been done here, other work that's been done here at OCLC. So I want to start with acknowledging that I live and work on the unceded traditional land of the Chochenyo people in what is now known as Oakland, California, and I'm grateful to past and present leaders for their stewardship of this land. As I mentioned, I am coming to you from Oakland, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am not an expert in the topic of racism and exclusion and its impact, but I am witness to it, and I'm always trying to learn and educate myself. And I'm really privileged to share what I have learned with you here today. And I just want to express that it is okay to feel discomfort in dealing with this topic, especially as we lean into it. So the Reimagined Descriptive Workflows project convened a group of experts, practitioners, and community members to determine ways of improving descriptive practices, tools, interfaces, and workflows in libraries and archives. The result of this, the community agenda, which is pictured here, has been offered to the broad library and archives community as a way of drawing together insights from the convening, related research, and operational work that we see going on in the field today. One of our radical assertions is that all institutions hold the power to make meaningful change in this space and all share collective responsibility. So this is part of our how. For those of us attending this meeting today and others who have yet to be invited into this space to consider possibilities for transformation.
The agenda is not a how-to guide. I want to emphasize that, but is constructed to it is constructed to instruct and chart a path forward towards reparative and inclusive description. The agenda is divided into two distinct parts. The first contains contextual information regarding the project, the convening, and the methods that were used to construct the agenda. It also frames the historical, local, and workflow challenges and tensions to consider when approaching inclusive and reparative metadata work. And then the second part of the report offers a framework of guidance that suggests actions and exercises that can help frame your institution's local priorities and areas for change, and also provides examples to inspire local work. So the motivation in doing this work is, of course, to advance inclusion and repair and metadata work, which is really grounded in the observations that more inclusive descriptions are drive a more inclusive discovery experience. And the community of library and archive professionals and other stewards of metadata have been falling short of our goals to be inclusive and welcoming for all. This is, I think, really nicely summarized in the cataloging code of ethics that was published in 2001, which says, and I'm quoting here, cataloging standards and practices are currently and historically characterized by racism, white supremacy, colonialism, othering, and oppression. So this is such a large challenge that we believe that it needs both a level of creative thinking and also the courage to re-examine existing practices and services in the spirit of reducing harm and expanding the circle of inclusivity. So we paired these two terms together, the need for reimagining and also this need for a radical approach in that reimagining. We were very much led by our advisors who set the terms for and led the work. And I am so grateful to have been led by this group of Indigenous, Black, and people of color. My special thanks today to both Stacey Allison Casson and Camille Callison, who were members of the advisory board and helped us connect to both Canadian as well as to global challenges in this area. So the 3 days spent together for our convening were very much defined by our advisory board. So again, gratitude towards our advisory board for the work that they put into helping to create this event, as well as to the attendees who dug in and did much of the work. So our framework of guidance may be remedial for some and may be revolutionary for others. Because descriptive practice reflects library or institutional practice, this work is for all of us in libraries and cultural heritage institutions, not just catalogers alone. And yes, it is vitally important that we hire and retain people of color within our institutions, but these are not issues for people of color alone to solve. Allies need to substantially support this work as well. So we identified 3 categories of work where traction to affect change is needed. Leadership needs to invest in restructuring priorities and subsequently to resource these priorities. Operationalizing is a necessary shift to inclusive and reparative practice in the day-to-day, and this also requires leadership support, especially for mid-level management and practitioners. And because we all have a role to play here, investment in professional and personal development will help with a mind shift to inform personal and professional practices. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the areas of the report and give just a handful of examples, but I encourage you to dive in and look more deeply. So under operational shifts, one of our calls to action is to really commit to the long game. So here, the work really needs to be a labor shared by everybody in our organizations, and this effort should not fall to the work of a single committee or to a few individuals who've already been working in this space. So leaders really must provide scaffolding that supports change over the long term while recognizing the urgency of these issues. So ongoing support supported by budget allocations, staffing, workflows, measures of productivity and performance are really needed to sustain the push for foundational changes and operational workflows over the long term. One example of this, I think, is the Reckoning Institution, which is at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So if you just take a look at their webpage on the Reckoning Initiative, you'll see a broad range of investment from that institution, really looking at how people across the libraries can engage in these topics. So I highly suggest this if you haven't looked at it already. Other examples are the need to promote respectful and reciprocal community co-design. So an example of this in the report, we call out the Storylines Project at the State Library of Western Australia, the Community-Driven Archives Initiative at Arizona State University, and the Orange County and Southeast Asian Archive Center Community Archives at UC Irvine. So these projects empower communities to take responsibility for collecting, describing, and stewarding collections that are important to their history and culture, with the library in a supporting role. Finally, I want to underscore under professional and personal development that work around topics that are linked to racism, othering, and erasure are difficult, time-consuming, and truly emotional. So it is essential that we build strong and multi-layered support of structures for the people that are involved in this work. We see a significant need for mentoring, relationships that provide reciprocal benefit for emerging, mid-career, and late career professionals, as well as for those in power, to help all to better understand a diversity of constituents. Recognition, buy-in, and funding from organizations and individuals with power and influence at all levels are critical. We are a learning profession, and we are never done learning. So I want to thank you for your time today, and really look forward to continuing our work and sharing what we can all learn together. Thank you.
I want to say thank you so much to both Jesse and to Mary Lee, who is also here, joined us today. That was a lot of work that took place within both the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and their work, and also to Mary Lee, who was here, and to note Rachel Freak, who was also one of the leads on the Reimagining Descriptive Workflows project. So I don't know if she's here today as well too, but thank you for joining us. And I know that we have many future discussions with them planned in the future. So I wanted to just take this time right now to introduce you to really the force behind a lot of this work today, and that is Dr. Sabrina Saunders, who's the CEO of Blue Mountain, but also was one of the forces behind trying to create NALA, the National Aboriginal Libraries Association, and we picked up some of that work and hope to do that community of work justice here in the future at NIKLA. So I want to introduce her. She's going to be giving back the, reading back the results of our breakout sessions, or introducing people who are going to be doing that. So welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you so much. I was actually the facilitator for breakout room 5. I'm going to start just to be able to let the others take a breather for a minute and sort of lay out sort of the ground rules of how we'll do it. So each of our facilitators will take about 3 minutes. They're going to highlight just some of the content that was shared in their exercise. Some groups talked, some groups stuck with the Post-it notes, but it's all going to come back in one way or the other. And then once I finish my little intro, I will go through breakout rooms starting with 1 and work our way down to 14. And they'll each unmute and engage their cameras, and we'll share some of their slides as well. So my group was a group of school librarians and special librarians for the most part, and I was really happy to join them as a former teacher myself. It was a nice group to be in. So this group noted a few interesting pieces. Unlike a public library or an academic library where you have colleagues, It was noted that often they were feeling alone in their organization and unsupported. We had hospital librarians, school librarians, K-12, and you may be the only person in your organization or building. They also found that they needed to reach out to outside organizations and other people for some kind of support on respectful terminology or just content, Indigenous content in any realm. And then the concept of truth and reconciliation may have been present in their organizations, but they were still seeing high levels of racism or just unawareness in the aspect of racism that was present. So a few of the areas that they talked about specifically on the criteria and the visioning and those pieces that they felt that we should be included was that we needed to have a real clear, concrete understanding of what the criteria was, that there should be some type of vetting, that it has to be replicable so that it addresses some kind of uniformity across all of Turtle Island, but still be flexible enough that it's leaving room for each individual community to have their specific nuances present. There should be some kind of continuous retouching to make sure that we're adapting as needed and not have this be we do it once and then we're done. We know that we are a living people, so we can't look at this as a historic go back and fix. We need to be growing with our content. And there should be some kind of simplified version for small organizations or one-person libraries who want to participate, but they don't have those large staff resources. So if you are a single school librarian or a single librarian working in a hospital, for example, you don't have a team behind you to make these things happen, but it doesn't make it any more or less significant that you're participating. So they wanted to have the ability to participate if you were a small crew. The use of Indigenous languages was really key. And the concept that we wanted to see our names in the catalogs, but also have the catalogs mean something for the general public to be able to find was really important. So somehow getting that concept that we need to be there, these are our identities and our names, but it can't be in a way that others then can't find or use it, because then it does defeat some of the pieces. But at the same time, this is a teaching tool, and the truth and reconciliation should be coming out of that. So we need to have that as a key area of our end goal. So that was group 5, which was our school libraries and special libraries. So next I'm going to call on Feather Miracle, and she had breakout room 1, which was our Indigenous librarians.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for that, Sabrina. So I did have our Indigenous librarians, and there was some interaction. What I did, I started going through. Did somebody change the colors? I started going through and putting the answer in orange in a square. But for this, the importance that work is being done here, the importance of why people attended is that work is being done, but it's not being shared. So people are really working in silos. So people are very interested in the work. Number 3, the importance, inclusivity, honor, and normative practice is what I got from this. Number 4, that times have been toxic. I shared a story about when I was in elementary school, and the librarian, when you used to have library class, the librarian talked about Indians of North America and specifically looked at me because it was the only Native kid, but she really didn't say it in like, oh, Indians of North America. She was like, Indians of North America, like in a mad way. So I felt that was kind of toxic. Carrying on, experience or interest. I think that just these ones are very short, where people go, they speak against disrespectful terms. And in library school, and just taking this, but I think that the notion, library schools need to teach the notion that there needs to be change within the cataloging system, and that these terms are not written in stone, right? That that it is a living document, and it, well, obviously needs to be changed. Next, project support and missing support. Just, it seems like there needs to be more attention in this area and to address it, because it's a lack of staffing, a lack of time, a lack of money. And so I think that budget-wise, it seems like budget-wise that each organization needs to have written into their policy a mandate where money is flowed to people to actually take on and do this work. And that seems to be the take-home message here. Time, funding, and the staffing to do it. This one was just the one answer, to see a terminology crosswalk that was created through consultation and integration of more terms into the LSP, like if using the ALMA, to see for there to be words and codes for all languages. And then next thing, the vision for the future of cataloging, subject headings, and descriptive terminology. So respective and flexible, reflective Indigenous peoples' language and choices. To become part of an integrated part of cataloging and not something separate. And then I was thinking also, like, to move beyond that, to store the information in the future, and to store these like the terminology in children, and normalize Indigenous ways of knowing, and the terminology in the same way that the gruesome Canadian history has been taught. So teaching the children that these terms are normal, and children will find it normal if you teach them that it's normal. And then like we wouldn't have to do this. Then blank page. So thank you very much for your time. Anna.
Thank you to group one. Our next 3 breakout rooms were public libraries. We're going to have each of them do their own individual, but you may see some similarities or differences. You never know, but these are the 3 that are public libraries. So Mary Dodge had the next breakout room. So we will pull up your Jamboard for you.
Thanks, Sabrina. So my group was a very thoughtful and empathetic group of public librarians who work with subject headings and the community very regularly. And so they're really here to listen and learn and connect with people doing similar projects, as they're most passionate about providing a transformational impact by supporting these, what they see as human rights, to have respectful terminology. And the respectful terminology will be inclusive and will also help build good relationships. They want to, in terms of having projects to support them, they want more support to complete projects, especially through grants and funding. They see this as important for doing consultations and building partnerships as well. And they're most interested in sharing best practices, more training opportunities, and supporting smaller libraries by sharing models of success. So again, like those best practices, but also how can we make these changes to, for example, subject headings, and what would be the model of success that other libraries who perhaps had funding or greater success were able to make these changes. And their overall vision was that by having respectful terminology, it would create a system that encompasses where settlers are comfortable with accurate terminology, and to build an awareness of the deep-rooted impact of colonization as well. So it was a very thoughtful group, and it was really great to work with everyone.
Thank you. Our next group is going to be Natalie McDonald, also Public Libraries.
Thank you, Sabrina. Yep, I'm group 3, and I just want to note that I had a couple people tell me during our session that they were not public librarians. So it's probably majority public librarians, but there is a mix in mine as well. I had a very large group, 51 people in my group. So I'm going to go start at slide 3, Sabrina, and I just kind of pulled out themes that I saw for each slide. And for slide 3, the largest theme that I saw was centering Indigenous voices as an important about this work and this project, as well as removing offensive language and mitigating harmful effects of colonial knowledge organization. And if you go to slide 4, the themes that I pulled out of slide 4 are feeling ashamed, feeling an outsider, feeling discouraged, and low self-esteem as describing how they felt, how the members of my group felt when they recalled their first time with negative and stereotypical terminology. And then for slide 5, the themes that I pulled out was that the work that we're doing, it's hard, it's difficult, and it's slow. Some people have found that there's a struggle to get colleague buy-in for the project, but then others, on a more positive note, have suggested that every bit of work counts, no matter how small it is, and not being afraid to take those steps. And then for slide 6, for what type of support did people have for completing this project, or what was missing? There was lots of support, which is really great. But what people said was missing is just not enough knowledge out there, not enough sharing to do the work. And then for slide 7, which is the type of criteria we should include in a model for, and that's responsive and respectful to Indigenous people, places, and things. It was active Indigenous involvement. And a huge theme was incorporating languages, many scripts, and having it be national in scope. And then if you go to the last one, what is your vision for the future? The number 1 theme that I pulled out was reflecting the community in an inclusive and national way.
Thank you so much. And our last of the public libraries, and of course you are 100% right, as some people came in, they weren't assigned rooms, different emails were used, so we started popping people in, so we didn't quite know where everybody lived. So in the end, there were some people who might cross over and spill into other rooms. But our last predominantly public library group is room 4, and that is Georgia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabrina. So yeah, my group was mostly, but not entirely, public libraries. So some things that came up through a lot of the questions actually was the importance that this work is Indigenous-led. And there was also a strong desire that came across for having standards and guidelines to follow. Other things that came up as important was normalizing decolonized terminology, and also taking into consideration the TRC recommendations. The biggest challenge that came up for this group was feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to start. And then the vision for the future that came up was having consistency across all systems with appropriate and respectful language, and a foundation of inclusion, equity, and access.
Thank you so much. So our next 2, 4, 5 breakout rooms are predominantly our academic libraries. So our host, Camille and Rebecca Ross, will be joining her on that one. They're going to be doing room 6, which is the first of our academic libraries.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I think Rebecca is joining me as well. And we had a group of academic librarians with us, and Rebecca was the manager of our jam board. So that was great to have that help. So really question number 2, people answered with saying why they came to the meeting, which was to connect and to learn. And to link in with the works of others. There seemed to be a really sincere willingness to support NIKLA's efforts towards creating a framework for national terminology. And question number 3 was really about, we said that people could enter as many times as they wanted to, and we had a really active group, as you can see, but we had participation in reconciliation efforts, healing from past and current traumas inflicted by the GLAM sector, and a real desire to listen and to learn from Indigenous communities and work together towards this path towards reconciliation. And we know that this is a path. It's not just a one and done thing that we can do, and that this needs to be a living terminology. And so that's been part of the plan. So it was good to hear that back. The next one was question number 4 was, what is your recollection of the first time that you use negative or stereotypical terminology? And so some of the people said that they heard this when they were young and that it was harmful. Some other people said it was in harmful terminology and subject headings, and noting the misogynistic and racist language. There was also a general sense of hurtful and harmful terms that people heard as children and that really affected them, and the long-term pain that comes from that. And so we spoke about this earlier too, about that subconscious pain that is derived from hearing this kind of racist and misogynistic and language used about people, about anybody, and especially about yourself too. So what has been the experience? And some people said that they were really surprised at how hard this work has been and how long it has taken, and that there's a real desire to learn from and work with others and work with Indigenous communities and to do it well. There's a general feeling of not knowing where to start. And then in question 6, many echoed a lack of relationships with Indigenous communities. And so there was also noting that resourcing was also noted as a challenge, to have staff time and the budget, as well as not knowing exactly where to start. And I think that that really speaks to the work that needs to happen in relationships with each other and how we can work more effectively with Indigenous peoples and communities moving forward. So that was about it. And I just want to say thank you again to Rebecca, and I'll pass it over back to Sabrina.
Rebecca, did you have anything that you wanted to add into that you pulled as any themes that were not noted?
No, that was great. Camille did a great job of covering all of that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Our next academic library will be presented by Percy Miller.
Hi, thank you, Sabrina. So I think that a lot of what the last 2 groups have said transfers over to the group I was leading. I'd say that something that stuck out for me was in 2 things that you feel are important about this work. One of the answers was about examining biases, and also there was a lot of support for the idea of having tangible steps towards reconciliation. If I were to sum up all of the questions and all of the slides sort of in one statement, I'd say that these things were persistent among the 8 questions. There was a need and a desire for more robust support and learning structures, be that financial, be that resource-based, that sort of thing, a need for funding and appropriate resource allocation. So having people specifically dedicated to this work within your organization, and making sure they're adequately supported in everything that they do, and an acknowledgement that collaboration with Indigenous communities is of the utmost importance. That was absolutely mentioned, I think, in every question. That was key. So too, I think the vision and the values for a future model can perhaps be nicely summed up in 3 words, which were participatory, respectful, and empowering. But yeah, thank you.
Your group was extremely organized. I was looking at that one. I was loving all the duplicates that were in there.
Yes, they took my direction for the duplicate tool excellently, and I really appreciate that they organized them before I even got a chance to start doing that. They were so on the ball, so kudos to my group.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. Our next academic library is going to be presented by Claire.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. We had a smaller group of academic librarians in our group, but robust participation in the board. So I think in terms of just why we were there, what brought us to the group was the common theme of seeking guidance, wanting to learn, just getting started, or having done some work in the area, but really wanting to see what's going on more broadly. Then for our question around what are the important elements of the work, definitely Indigenous-led, Indigenous authority over the terminology, consultation with Indigenous peoples. Those were all themes that came out. Also, the fact that this is an ongoing and evolving project. It's not, does not have, and I heard that in a couple of the other presentations, it doesn't have an end, you know, in the next year or two or anything. It will continue to evolve, and we need to account for that. And then, of course, relationship development being key, not only within our own communities, Indigenous communities here, but also internationally as well. Question 4 about the negative stereotypical terminology was really interesting. Several of us commented in the boxes about childhood experiences that do resonate over time. Some talked about the continuation of those kinds of experiences in the work environment today. And then the notion that if it is something you've overheard from either adults or your colleagues, that it can actually cause tension where you may, you know, want to respect a grandparent or a colleague, but that they've said something that is really quite harmful. So that sticks with us, and there is a sense of feeling ashamed as well, partly about the profession that may not be evolving fast enough. In the next question here about experience or interest in integrating the respectful and correct terminology, there were many comments about having participated in committees, and so, you know, that being the first experience or the ongoing work that is happening. Others were working on their own and really trying to transition terminology using the subject headings or respectful terms that are being developed or articulated by others. Then when we talk about project support or support that was missing, there was a real notion that there may be a verbal commitment or some kind of an articulation of support, but that is not necessarily backed up by the time to do the work or the resources to do the work. And that often this is done off the, and this came out in a couple of our questions as well, that this can be done off the side of our desks rather than being given adequate support to do. And then the notion that there's a lack of a central repository to turn to, and that too often we are working in silos and not collaboratively. Moving on to the types of criteria that would make this, that would be necessary for a successful model. Definitely national and consistent collaboration came out. Having a central knowledge portal that others could draw upon, consulting with local communities, embedding national standards. I heard this from one of the other groups too, embedding national standards in the education of professionals. I think it was in the OCLC presentation perhaps as well. And then absolutely repeated through this question as well, providing the time and the resources to do the work in a dedicated and focused fashion. And then finally, in terms of the vision really was that that we establish standards that can evolve as needed, that they are, it's not static, that there is an authority file created, that we respect Indigenous specific vocabularies, and that, of course, the work be valued and funded appropriately. That was it for our group.
Thank you so much. We have Patricia Geddes, who's going to do our next academic library.
Thank you, Sabrina. So our group was a smaller group, maybe of about 12 participants who were thoughtful in sharing their responses to the questions using the Jamboard sticky notes with limited dialogue. So I hope to share and summarize those responses to the best of my ability with gratitude for that which was shared. Themes for two things that are important about this work included the importance of local context, relationships, and consultation, as well as the power of words or terminology. And I found that was sort of reflected when participants shared their recollections and impacts of experiences with negative stereotypical terminology, for which the broader themes are similar to those already shared. And it underlines that this work must be completed with care. For the next question, the themes in respect to participants' experiences or interest in integrating respectful and correct terminology into descriptive practices, those themes included adding our experience with adding local subjects to bibliographic records, that the work is complicated, challenging, that there's uncertainty, and that there's a need to begin with unlearning among colleagues, and then in discussion with students to understand the terminology and the need for change. There was interest in seeing Indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge systems reflected in libraries. Themes for the types of support available or missing from projects related to respectful terminology included projects that are incomplete, related to a need for local consultation. Some folks wrote about the support they received from Indigenous librarian colleagues in their networks, with acknowledgement of the pressures on their time, as well as a support that they have support and a need for professional development time to engage in the work and learning, and a need for local guidance and supports in relation to more cataloging staff and cultural expertise with respect to elders in order to advance this work. Themes found in response to the types of criteria to include in a successful model included learning and education within library studies programs and among library staff, as well as relationships and accountability to and learning within the local Indigenous context, and encouraging and supporting with funding more Indigenous representation within information professions. So both in terms of schooling and probably with professional positions for folks who complete their schooling. Themes related to participants' vision of the future of descriptive practices included collaborative practice between GLAM organizations and among Indigenous and non-Indigenous library workers. And for descriptive practices that shift away from LCSH and that support iterative changes, as well as more than one preferred term, or a shift towards multiple systems of descriptive practice. And to finish off, to reflect how communities name themselves, to serve as positive examples for Indigenous youth. Thank you.
And thank you again. Our last academic library, we still have more to come after this, but our last of the academic libraries will be presented by Stacey Allison Kassan.
Thank you, Sabrina. Great, thanks, Hannah. Could we actually go back one slide? I'm just going to take a moment, and I really love also what Alyssa Cherry said about enjoying our lives as well. So I just want to express some gratitude for spring, maybe unless you're in Winnipeg, where spring hasn't come yet, but some gratitude for longer days and perhaps more sun. So thank you for that, Hannah. So we can go to the next slide. So I think in our group, I think perhaps we were a bit of a smaller group, but that we saw people were coming maybe for two main reasons. So one, to hear about what others were doing, but also in learning about how to have their work supported, see how to do better work with subject headings, but also to see a framework to strengthen and harmonize Canadian activities. So that was really great. Next slide, please. And before I forget, I want to express my gratitude to the group for our conversation. We did have a little bit of conversation that wasn't actually captured in the Jamboards as well. So a couple of things I want to mention here. One is that multilingualism was mentioned as being an important part of the work, as well as things that we've heard reflected in other feedback, such as community consultation, being inclusive, thinking about representation, and really as the callback to the opening, that people should be called by their names, but also that everything here in the country now known as Canada already had names, and that it is about restoring as well. So there's that restorative aspect of it. So, and the last thing I want to mention here is there's also a attention to open systems, and that to me also relates to access. Next slide. So we had a conversation, some conversation not reflected in this Jamboard about negative terminology. Again, hearing things in school, not having your name reflected, having to teach or instruct people to use the catalog using inappropriate terminology, or being misnamed even, so going to Europe and being called an American rather than Canadian. Next slide, please. So we had a variety of reflections on an experience about integrating respectful terminology. So things like putting a notice in the catalog to make sure that people know that there is inappropriate terminology. I love the comment about knowing that you can change LCSH headings with the proposal, or at least you can try and change LCSH headings. Being constrained by working in a shrinking cataloging team, and that came up a few times. But also thinking about how we can learn from the very beginning of working with these systems. So next slide, please. So I think this slide, we saw some things about project success. So the green sticky there about administrative support, a Decolonizing the Library working group, Indigenous initiatives team about a really strong level of support. But you also see reflected here some things that were missing. So shrinking numbers of academic cataloging librarians, cataloging being outsourced, not having expertise or sufficient focus of resources, administration liking the sound of things, but not necessarily backing that up with resources. And again, support for the idea, but not as much support for doing the work. And in particular, when we have systemic problems like grappling with ILS systems or moving to new systems. So next slide, please. So lots here to see about what could be in a successful model. So open technologies and respectful systems, centering Indigenous worldviews. So not just changing terminologies and keeping the hierarchy, but really representing those worldviews. Consultation, of course, comes back again. Indigenous language, again, across many domains. And you'll see also the stickies sort of along the bottom have to do with vendors, OCLC, involvement of Library of Congress, LAC, and OCLC, because of course, for those who have been involved in this kind of work, there is, there's a whole ecosystem that is relating to doing descriptive work that needs to be addressed as well. Next slide, please. We did run out of time, so we had a lot of discussion about the previous two. So a couple of highlights for what's our vision for the future. And you see again, respectful approaches and this idea of a ecosystem for creating new standards of inclusion. So consultation, regional based, continual revision and maintenance, flexible. So again, relating to something that can be updated, and harmonization across the GLAM sector. Thank you. And thanks to my group.
Thank you. So we have 3 breakout rooms left. We're going to get into some diversity now. We have museums sector coming up. So we have Heather George and Mary Collier.
Hi, I'm not sure if Heather was able to stay in the meeting, but I can speak for the museums group. We were a very small group, only maybe about 6 museum folks and 1 friend from publishing, I believe. So it's a little bit hard to capture everything down because there weren't that many perspectives, but I'll try and get through them. In terms of the second question, certainly just a support for respectful terminology, reclaiming Indigenous heritage, supporting repatriation and language revitalization, people wanting to make sure that their own language was represented, just loving to talk about respectful and proper terminology, indigenizing collections management, being part of nomenclature committee, which we heard about earlier, and in terms of publishing, the alignment with librarians who are having similar conversations. In question 3, I have my notes over here. So things that you feel are important, that it's open and accessible, certainly well-funded, Indigenous-led, that there is Indigenous agency and voice, that it's a national approach and collaborative. For question 4, so certainly people having the experience of reading archival descriptions and finding racist terminologies in there, experiences in childhood, family members using racist terminology, feeling ashamed by that, and just general sort of shock and frustration, not knowing how to respond in these circumstances. In question 5, in terms of what's been your experience and interest, just always and in every opportunity. Perhaps sometimes making non-speakers feel inconvenienced, but acknowledging that Indigenous language speakers are inconvenienced by colonial terms and approaches all the time. Folks have reviewed questionable and incorrect terms in collections databases, and sometimes even when the terminology exists, the information about the collections they're dealing with is incomplete. And then in terms of, from our publishing friends, this misalignment between subject headings in Canada and the United States. And in question 6, in terms of support, people are getting support from their colleagues, from management, from community members, which is wonderful. But what's missing, certainly the funding, the technology, national leadership, and contribution from communities, and the dedicated time to do the work. And in question 7, what would make the sectors more responsive in terms of technology, updates being integrated with wider infrastructure, flexibility in collections management software, open and flexible platforms, an ongoing review process, which I think has been mentioned before. And in question 8, vision of greater capacity for Indigenous terms and language in systems, that it's Indigenous oriented and led by speakers of language as well, that there's ongoing review, it's responsive, and that there's, you know, a move from just looking at things from Western museology and Western methodologies and integrating Indigenous museology and perspectives as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're moving on to our archives group, which is our second last, and this is Don Johnson.
Just catching up. Hello. Our group numbered about 12 or a baker dozen. I guess there were 13 of us. Good input, and thank you all for your participation. One of the themes that came across throughout a lot of the questions was not just interest in respectful terminology, but respect itself. What you actually see, many people came with formal education, but looking for the work of others, or to see how they imagine and envision it. It is interesting too that maybe one of the things that they did at least learn was that they should become a member of NIKLA and learn about it. So very positive. Next question. Important things about the work. Throughout a lot of the questions had to do with collaboration, consultation, building of relationships, inclusivity, dialogue. So really the desire to be respectful, and I don't think it's something that people need to learn how to do that, but I think it's how they bring it into their work and what they're going to be doing with it. Also interesting that the right to take back names. We heard a little bit of that in some of the other groups too, that ownership and maybe return of names, and it is happening at various places across the country and in the States. I think I've heard something. Next question. Always difficult. I think what was surprising to me was everybody in the group upset, but feeling of ignorance or confusion or naivety, which is can be just as hurtful as something directed at you. So, next question. I think here a formal training actually prepared most of our participants well, and wanting to know how to start, where to start, the questions they should be asking, and I think they're sounded like they had a lot of experience. So I think it's coming to this event, I think is a good step towards that. I guess there's a realization a lot of the systems of terminology, whether they be a practice or whether they be technology, they actually need to be able to allow for multiple ways of describing. And I think that focus maybe on a technology is a step towards actually being able to implement something. So, next question. I think we've heard this before. Support, time, people, and I guess I would say beyond people, but maybe some dedicated resources, long-term funding. Volunteers do great work, but I think you need to be able to pay people for their time, their expertise, and their efforts. And I think there's and naturally it goes with that is that balance between what you would like to do and what you can afford to do. So also interesting note there about that the compensation really needs to be commensurate with their expertise. So yeah, a place to start. Expectations as well was an interesting thing, and I think that there's consultation certainly within communities, but there's consultation with your funders. So next question. Successful model criteria. I guess it goes back to some of the things that have been said elsewhere, but really looking at the long picture. This is these models need to be living. They need to be evolving. They have to adapt to the needs of the sector and needs of the community. It's again consultants within the community. Yeah, and I think it's also there's an idea that those implementations will be that much better because they are flexible. Last question. A lot of things we've heard before, accurate search and retrieval, and that's sort of a given requirement for a lot of our archival descriptive systems. But I like this one. It's got to be fun, right? I mean, we're not here just because we believe in our work, but we have to enjoy it too. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for making the note about joining NIKLA as a member. As your treasurer, I will make that thankless plug I've just put into our chat. We had about just under 400 people who have been with us today, in and out of the day. So, you know, definitely we know that not all are members. So if it's something that you're interested in investigating, look at our site, take a look at the NIKLA page, and please, we hope that you'll join us. I'm just checking to see if we have Catherine and Jesse with us, which are our last room. This is the lucky 13 room, of course, breakout room number 13. Catherine was a woman without a home So she was not assigned. And then Jesse was given a home, but no people. He was going to run a Francophone group, and many of our Francophones chose to jump into other areas. So they got a bit of a late start, but in true fashion, true professionals, they managed to get through. So you might not get through all of the questions, but thank you so much, and lucky breakout room number 13.
Awesome. Thank you, Sabrina. I hope that I didn't scare the Francophones into the other rooms after my French welcome this morning. But we'll get into our questions now. What we lacked in time, we made up for in enthusiasm and participation. So here we go. So this is question number 2. What brought you here? There's a variety of answers here. To sum it up, a lot of people came because they find this work important and they're really interested in this topic in particular, while others came because they were invited to participate. They came out of general interest, they came for research purposes, or they came because it's part of their professional work. On to the next. Okay, so what are 2 things that brought you? What are 2 things you feel are most important about this work? You can see we had a few artists here in the group too, adding hearts and check marks. So if I can summarize, some of the key points here were the necessity for authentic voices. And it's important to ensure that we use names for Indigenous peoples that Indigenous peoples use themselves. I think that's a really key piece. And then another one that's been mentioned in nearly every group is it must be Indigenous-led. Okay, so next question, what's your recollection of the first time negative or stereotypical terminology was used? Here we had a lot of commentary back, and we had a lot of discussion in the Zoom as well, just orally, but to sum up, people felt sad, they felt hurt, and some were offended as well when they came across this type of terminology being used to describe themselves. And some wanted to disappear, whereas some felt powerless to speak up at the time. Okay, so next, what's your experience or interest in integrating this into your work? So here, looks like there may be some more additions since I created my speaking notes. But if I could sum it up, the work is challenging, but it's very rewarding at the same time. And a few people have noted that they've seen a recent shift in the last 5 years or so to workplaces and people being more open-minded to this type of work and integrating it into their workplaces. What types of supports did you have to complete this project and what was missing? As seen in some of the other groups, people felt that their work environments and their colleagues were supportive. However, it was also noted that there's often a shortage of time and competing challenges when trying to integrate this work with their pre-existing job descriptions, and also the need for long-term sustainable funding. I think a lot of people who are here today who are doing this type of work can understand the need for long-term funding, where oftentimes this work is project-based. It's got a start and end date, but we all know that there's no end date to this type of work. So not sure if there's anything else to add. I see they added some nice pictures here before I got into the discussion. So
thanks, Jesse. You did a great job of summarizing the discussion that we had. Thank you.
So before I turn it back over to our co-chairs, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our facilitators who helped with the breakout sessions. They came to a training to learn how to use Jamboard. They had to deal with us asking them to do some extra pieces on there by doing the presentation. They're now going to go and write us a little report on their session as well. So thank you so much for taking that the time to assist us with this program. And then I will turn it back over to Camille. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I want to say thank you so much to all the facilitators and those who read out and compiled the results. That was terrific. And it was great to hear from everyone. We really appreciate all of your input and for sharing with us. I heard a lot of common themes across all of the breakout sessions and the list, and we really want to be here to listen to you. So this was really about creating that dialogue back and forth and starting to create a shared vision together. And without you, we don't have that shared vision. So we really appreciate you. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you. So without further ado, so the co-lead on this project is Stacy, and I have been working on this, and we will continue to work, but actually, so that makes it very difficult because of course, Jesse and I are co-leads of NIKLA, and so, but we're co-leads of this project. So I guess that's where we have a little bit of overlap there, but we like to do things together and to create that community and working together respectfully towards change. So I'm just going to share our PowerPoint now, and hopefully that will all work out. No, let's just turn it on.
Oh, and we're going to be doing, I should say, we're going to be doing a bit of a dance here back and forth.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to have this brief presentation about our project proposal that we have been working on. And as you've heard, I think all through today and all through the Jamboard sessions and the breakout rooms is that Indigenous rights and human rights are at the heart of this work, and really centering that as vitally important really does bring transformative change to the way we do description.
So we want to talk a little bit about United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As we know, Canada has finally signed on in principle to this, and we have now Bill C-30. I just almost said Bill C-31, but anyway, we have another pivotal bill in Canadian history is Bill C-15, which was received assent in June of 2021. And so we need to work together to implement the Canadian framework based on the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which includes Indigenous people's language, being called by our own name, our cultural and heritage history, and being recognized as sovereign nations within Canada. So there's a lot of things that we need to work on as Canadians to create that shared history and to move together towards a future for all Canadians. And so part of this, I believe, is really based in, we talk about the 4 R's, which was an article written by Berman and Kirkness back in 1991, which was the published by AFN, and we do have these all cited for you in another document, but it really talked about reciprocity and respect for Indigenous knowledge, responsibility, and reverence. And then really, we've been talking more about relationships today, and there was another paper that was authored on the 5 R's. And now I've noted that in STEM, they really are talking about a 6th R, and that would have been through representation. So that's the addition there. So I just have started calling them the R's now because many different communities talk about them in different ways, but I think that it's all really important. And as you can see, we really do have that responsibility when we enter into relationship with Indigenous people of respect for knowledge and reverence for our knowledge, and it is a reciprocal relationship where there's give and take, not just take, and not just extractive nature of Indigenous knowledges. So that I think that we really have to be respectful as well, too, obviously, in the way that we talk about each other and about things. And coming from an Indigenous worldview, that is coming from a framework of respect. So those are very important moving forward.
So our proposed project pathway for building this national framework is to start with initial seed funding. And the seed funding is going to give us the opportunity to develop a large grant. And through that large grant, be able to implement the framework itself, which is a platform for Indigenous terminologies. And then after the grant period is done, we move into probably the more difficult, for anybody who's done any sort of digital project work, the more difficult phase of membership, maintenance, and ongoing development. So this is a really important part of the project as well. And as we heard, I think also repeated through today, there really needs to be ongoing staff time and participation from across all sectors to make this successful. And I didn't put timelines in here, but we're probably, if I was to sketch it out, or we were to sketch it out, it'd be an initial period of about a year and a half, then at least a 5-year period of this larger grant implementation period. And then of course, off into the future with our maintenance mode. So go ahead, Camille. So again, echoing what we've heard over and over and over, I think, is Indigenous-led, Indigenous operated and designed. And I want to just do a little call out to Sabrina and Feather, who are on this meeting today, and to Camille for really getting NIKLA off the ground to be able to have some of that, those resources and those people that we have this Indigenous organization. Next slide, please. Of course, collaborative platform for vocabulary sets. And again, we hear, especially, I think across our sector, we would like to collaborate. We want to connect our work. We want to be able to be efficient and to be able to share our knowledge, our experiences, and also share our data. Next slide, please. And community contributions are really important part of this, and not just contributions in terms of people who are working in some of our knowledge organizations, but also coming from communities themselves that hold a lot of community knowledge. So to be able to build in workflows and possibilities to have community contributions to our terminology, so that we have really good vetted terminology. And next slide, please. And we talk a lot about community and nation terms and geographic terms, but we know there is a much wider world when it comes to vocabulary and terminology. And so really envisioning the ability to move beyond or in addition to think about all the kinds of terminologies that would allow us to uphold, as Camille was mentioning, to uphold UNDRIP, to think and center human rights and Indigenous rights, is to really move in a way that is really holistic in terms of what kind of terminology needs to be there. And next slide. And of course, sustainable and stable. This is cataloger me speaking about this need to have something that is sustained over the long term, is stable, and is able to be used in an ongoing basis. And again, I think we all know that that really is helpful with success of projects, is to be able to have that sustainability. And next slide.
So I think some of the key elements Stacey's already talked to you about is really multilingual, Indigenous oversight and protocols. So we know that terminology can be, some terminology is private, some is sacred, some is work that people will work on with communities, and that might not be shared at within the NIKLA level, but we do want to make space for it. High level and community specific, really that data that's going forward, and that it needs to be collaborative and coordinated. We've talked a lot about dedicated staff being part of this project, and that there does need to be training for other people. And I'll just.
And then a few things that I want to mention and that came up today as well, and is that there needs to be a variety of output formats. So systems that use MARC, systems that use double core, archival descriptive systems. So really having a variety of output formats. So if you really are in need of authority type records, or your system is able to handle linked data, for example, that we have the ability to meet those different output formats and input formats for that, saying that as well, so that we can really be flexible. And that's also where technical generosity comes in, so that we're able to, again, be accessible to sort of the widest number of communities in that sustainable way.
And one of the things that we're really hoping to move forward with is resurrecting some of the Canadian subject headings that are really specific to Canada, and hopefully working collaboratively with French language and other translated language formats. So we're hoping that that collaboration can work moving forward. But really all of this is really important to acknowledge the training needs that we have with within library archives and other information professionals, that we need to have embedded cross-cultural training for those already. And then I'll just turn it over to Stacey to talk about some of our new professionals coming in, since that's her area.
Yeah. So yeah, we also, again, recognize that learning and training and education is a really important part of this work, and really truly leading to that sort of transformative change, and as well as that sort of sustainable future that we hope to see. So all of this, of course, requires governance, which is maybe is highly connected to how we do our work in a respectful and appropriate way. So next slide. And part of this project is really trying to think about, well, what does governance look like? And we don't have you don't have a vision that is entirely figured out. That is actually part of the work, but we do need to have an innovative model for Indigenous-led governance and management of terminology, but also shared responsibility and accountability, and membership with ethics and accessibility as key factors. So ensuring that that the terminology or vocabularies that are part of this platform are really accessible to the most number of people and most number of organizations across Canada. And again, drawing on the work of Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who does work in digital humanities and has a really wonderful book called Generous Thinking, that sustainability needs solidarity. So we really need to be working all together, and we need to be really putting resources to this work in appropriate ways that really leads to sustainability and use over the long term. So for this future, we need funding and technology that allows for that sustained use. So really, this is also a call to solidarity. And next slide, please. Which also talks about reciprocity and responsibility. So certainly part of that solidarity is thinking about how we do our work that is cross-institutional, that allows us to fund development, contributions, and maintenance. As you've also heard, and as many of you probably know, this work can be really hard in a lot of ways because of the lack of resources to do that work. And even though it's important, it might be really hard to do it in an ongoing way. And certainly that sort of shared future of solidarity and reciprocity is really important.
So I think that this really speaks to the need for us to work together as communities rather than institutional or silos where where we are working in isolation from each other and not being able to share that information and that work because the workload is, as we know, very heavy. So really, we're talking about having two paths and one future for schemas of knowledge and for ontologies and terminology really coming from an Indigenous worldview, is a project where all creation is equal. And when we come from a place of respect, that's respect for all peoples, no matter their race or gender or religion or nationality and or their sexuality. So really thinking about things with the R's that I mentioned, respect, relationship, reverence, reciprocity, responsibility to each other, and representation. And really versus that Western knowledge schema, which is really hierarchical. We know that it's male, white, Christian, heteronormative, and often excludes other people's history or culture, religion, gender, and it uses antiquated terminology, and some of which is now known to be slurs. And we want to prevent future generations from having to look up themselves by a slur word or by having to see the slur word underlined as a linked data term in the future. So that alone can be very traumatic for people.
So we are inviting you all in your different capacities to join us on the next phase of this journey as we go forward towards this future.
So I guess where are we going to go from here? And you saw us little stumble on our dance steps there. So we'll have to get a little bit better at them. But where are you going from? Where are we going to go from here? So really, we're talking about envisioning a shared future and a proposal for a national Indigenous terminology platform where there's shared knowledge, of course, with crediting people where we receive the knowledge from, which is traditional Indigenous cultural concepts of ownership, where we acknowledge other people and their contributions to this work. So we want to make sure that we are conscious and always doing that as well. So we want you to imagine
the radical possible.
It is possible. We believe, and we want you to believe with us as well, too.
So going forward, this national system for Indigenous terminologies for use across libraries, archives, museums, and knowledge and cultural organizations. And really to move us away from universal and colonial systems like Library of Congress subject headings to develop Indigenous specific systems of terminology located in the country now known as Canada.
So what do we hope to give to future generations? Are we going to give them love and respect to the future? And so that's what we hope to be able to give them. And we hope that you will join us in imagining a better future and a more respectful future of all people. So we hope that you will join us with that. And with that, we just are willing to move into the a little scarily moving into the question and answer period here. And hopefully we will be able to answer some of the questions, and we have enough time for that as well. So I'm just gonna stop sharing. So I think our council members are going to ask some questions, and I don't know how much time we have left, but I think basically the person who's kept us on track is Sabrina, and we may not have time for questions. We may have to ask you to email those to us and move forward with our thank you, and to ask Jessica, who I want to apologize that we forgot to have her at the beginning, and we would like to be able to move forward with that, and with thanks for all of our elders. So before we do that, we just have that on the screen, and maybe Jessica can lead us in a Thanksgiving address.
I just want to make sure that we do have a short poll. We're not done with all of the polls.
Oh,
so there's
I'm so sorry. Thank you for keeping me on track.
So if you have a moment, and please do feel free to put questions in the chat or contact us later if you have any questions or comments. And I really also want to thank everyone for all the time today. Thank you. So if you could, yeah, just
I think we have one more poll after this, and
oh yes, so there's one more poll after this. Okay, thank you everybody for answering that poll. Okay.
and I think we have an evaluation poll now, is that correct?
Yes, so if you would like to evaluate or do a poll based on your experience today, that would be really, really valuable for us in planning future events. Yeah, thank you. I just see Rose's comment in the chat about a number of hours work. It's absolutely a challenge. So thank you for surfacing that.
I appreciate the opportunity to be around leading thinkers on this topic to give such humble guidance to those of us who are still doing our best to champion this work. So hands up, and my heart is open to all the goodness and foundation that's been laid before today.
Well,
thank you
very much. It was a bit more of a challenge than we realized, planning a large gathering of this nature. I think we underestimated the response to this. So we had over 500 people respond, and I don't think that we ever imagined that we would have this many people. So I just asked Jesse to join me now and just saying thank you to all of our volunteers and our facilitators and all of those who presented today, and the council members, and to all of you who attended. So thank you very much. I just raise my hands to all of you in the tradition of the Northwest Coast and say thank you, Madhu.
Oui, merci à toutes et à tous pour votre participation à notre événement aujourd'hui. Et un gros merci aux aînés, aux parleurs de langue traditionnelle, au comité de planification, aux présentateurs et aux bénévoles. Merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.
And now I'd like to welcome Jessica, and thank you so much for being here today and for your patience.
Segon sevo gwegon. Wat kwanu aradon sevo gwegon ago egon ji wagatsununi gon idoes. Igarakuneta yungyet. Gan waxkare wage dano ganyoke hagani wa gungun jodo. Gontege nidi wageno dano segon skidron. So hi everybody, I am Garak Renetta and I am Mohawk from Bear Clan and I live in Tyendinaga. And I was invited here to do a closing for everybody. Just a really quick thing. As part of our Haudenosaunee creation story, it talks about our original instructions. And when all the parts of creation were being made, everything was given in an instruction. or responsibility as to how to interact with the natural world and how everything has a role within there. And our original instruction was to be grateful for all of our gifts, to show gratitude and respect, and to always remember that we're a part of creation and no more important than any other part of it. So one way we do this is to acknowledge this through our words, through something called our Ohandagar and Dekwa. And it's a way to bring our minds back together and reestablish the importance, and to always ensure we are doing things in a sustainable way and remembering our generations yet to come. Ungere wan hodo ne ganuwar duntra. Ne gadi agwego eskaji under a wahwe nuni, ne ungwatni goran, dano de chide nuerado, ne gazat stunt sarawana satwayera. Dano ne wahi, Gina Hodom, de up tomorrow, Gonto Gion Jade, Dano Jit Garnyade. So I'm going to close the day today with our Thanksgiving. We're going to bring all of our minds together, and we're going to offer our greetings and our thanks to the great natural powers, as well as to everything that is mingling here on earth and in the sky. Jijaranton de etinu harado ne ungwe sua, Giaguego yungwayo. Yungwayote, Skatne, ne Gadi Skana, Gazan Stonsera, Dano Gatni Gorio, Agahage Jade, Etonio Duhakne, and Guatni Gora. So we're just going to start by giving thanks to all of the people and all the people that are here working together for peace, power, and a good mind here on the earth. Onagadi Nua, Deetinu Harado, Ne Yetini Saha, Ohuanja. Gisegon diagot gawin haje, Ginue, Ide Wanderundige, Dano Gisegon diagot gawin haje, Gina Hodeson, Dayungwash Nyan Yanjunhage, Tonio Duhak, Nean Guatnigora. So we're giving our thanks to our mother, the earth, that she still goes along giving up her powers and that she helps us all live a good life here on the earth. Onagari Nua, Deetinu Horado, Nega Nekarunyo. Gisego and Scarage way Gina Hodo ne Wahetgon Sky on Gionjade. Da oni Yungwanyat Danawansta, ne not ne a Gayan Tosera, Gariota Sua, Dano Ungwe Sua, Tonio Duhak ne Guatnigora. We offer our greetings to all the waters, that they still wash away all of the things that are not good on the earth, and that they still quench the thirst for all the plants, the animals, and the people. Onagadi nua de etinu horado ne ganjont sua, at nora sua, dano aguego wange tididero, gisego yo di no harin yo haje, ne oni ne audi warong, ne johakwa ayungwa don't say, Tonio duhak ne angwatni gora. We offer our greetings and thanks to all of the fish, the fish, the turtles, and everything that lives in the waters, that they still give themselves up for food for us. Onagari nua de etinu horado ne aguegon sa oyera yuntundunis ohun jogon dano ohun jage. Gisegon ganektiosta and gundi nagrage ne ojinua sua gariote sua dano ojidan ogua. De etinu horadons gisegon wadons ide watsari ojake gakwa idawaks ojake onungwa de watsta. Dano ayungwa da garihage jini gariwes ohunjage de yungwa demorie. Tonio duhak ne ungwatni gora. We offer our greetings and thanks to all of the things that are naturally growing in the earth and above the earth. They still provide nice bedding for the animals, the birds, and the bugs. And we are grateful that we are still able to find them, as some of them are for us to eat and some of them are for medicine. And they keep us all healthy for the length of our lives here on the earth. Onagari nua de etinu horado ne aguego yunhe tkundi nagare ganto chionjade dano jitgar nyade. Gisego ni gundi yerha jina hodon sagoderi hunde ne sungwatison. Daoni de etinu horadons gisego wadons ide watkato dano ide wadahun sidade. Tonio duhak ne angwatni gora. We also give our greetings and thanks to all of the things that are running about here on the earth, the animals and the birds. They are still doing all of the duties that they were given in the beginning. And we're also grateful that we're able to see them and hear them. Onagari nua de atinu harado ne agwagon skatne yo de otaje jitkan hiade. Jisegon tariwat diha ne joera zesta aze suni ne gahne karunyo. Yunki yat danuha dano de yunquisat te danis. Tonio duhak ne ungwatni gwana. We're grateful for all of the things that are working together in the sky, that still they move around, making new waters, they protect us and they make it bright here on earth. Onagari nua de chi de nua rado ne gazat santerawana sa oyera de ne sungwa di sone gwego roko dago ne kota anya gonto jion jade. Tonio duhak ne gwatni gora. We give our greetings and thanks to the great natural power, as well as to the one that finished creating our bodies and all of the things that he has put together and made useful for here on earth. Onatoniore wagadere watgueni, doga teno sungetni gorha, izegine ize watasunduro, tukniwanage dano doneto. So I have done the best of my ability, and if there's anything that I've forgotten, feel free to just make it right in your head. And that's all of the words, and that's it for today. Nyawak goa sewa gwego.